What if the history we know is only half the truth? Beneath the soil, in the depths of oceans and hidden in forgotten caves, lie objects that do not fit into the story we've been told. Artifacts too old, too advanced, or too dangerous for the official record. These discoveries challenge timelines, disrupt the comfort of established history, and force us to ask, who walked this earth before us? Tonight, we will journey into the shadows of the past, where science meets secrecy and every stone holds a story that someone does not want you to hear. The Ica Stones, Chronicles of Prehistoric Worlds. They were first discovered not in a grand archaeological dig, but in the dusty markets of a small Peruvian town. Piled casually among trinkets and pottery shards, they looked unremarkable. Smooth, rounded stones, dark in color, their surfaces etched with strange carvings. At first glance, they could have been dismissed as decorative curiosities, the sort of thing a local artisan might sell to tourists. But look closer, and something unexpected emerges. The carvings show images that should not exist. Dinosaurs, drawn with a level of anatomical accuracy that would only become possible after the rise of modern paleontology. Scenes of humans riding these creatures as if they had lived side by side. Others depict surgical procedures, complex operations such as heart transplants and brain surgery, rendered in surprising detail. And scattered among them are maps of the stars, constellations arranged as they might have been tens of thousands of years ago. The man who brought them to public attention was Dr. Javier Cabrera Darquea, a respected physician from Ica, Peru. In the 1960s, he received one of these stones as a gift, and what began as a curiosity quickly became an obsession. He started collecting them, thousands upon thousands, until his home became a museum to what he believed was the legacy of a forgotten civilization. Cabrera was convinced these stones recorded the history of an ancient people who lived long before any civilization known to us, a culture that had mastered both advanced medicine and the observation of prehistoric life. For Cabrera, the implications were staggering. If the stones were genuine, they would rewrite the history of humanity, collapsing timelines and erasing the neat boundaries we place between epochs. They suggested that our species, or something very much like it, had walked the earth alongside the great reptiles, and that this mysterious civilization had preserved its knowledge in stone, leaving behind a message that survived across ages. Yet, from the beginning, the Ica stones were surrounded by controversy. The Peruvian government eventually declared them modern forgeries, claiming local farmers had carved them to sell to collectors. Some even came forward, admitting they had scratched the designs themselves with simple tools, aging the stones with dust and dung to make them look ancient. To many scientists, this seemed to close the case, but not for Cabrera, nor for a small number of researchers and explorers who had seen the scope of the collection firsthand. There were thousands of stones, too many, they argued, for a handful of villagers to have produced as mere curiosities. And the level of detail in some of the carvings, the internal anatomy of dinosaurs, the surgical techniques, seemed to require knowledge that officially the carvers could not have possessed. The debate would only deepen as more stones emerged, each carrying images that seemed to reach across the impossible gulf of time. Cabrera's home in Ica became something between a museum and a shrine. Visitors would enter through a narrow doorway and find themselves surrounded by shelves upon shelves of these mysterious stones, each one numbered, cataloged, and stored with almost obsessive care. The air inside was thick and dry, with the faint scent of dust and aged rock, as though one had stepped into a vault that had been sealed for centuries. To stand among them was to be surrounded by 1,000 voices speaking in a language of images, battle scenes between men and dinosaurs, ceremonial gatherings under constellations no longer visible in our skies, intricate diagrams of human organs, cross-sections of bones, depictions of surgical tools and procedures. One stone in particular showed a heart transplant in progress, the patient lying still, the surgeon's hands mid-motion surrounded by assistants. Another depicted the stitching of a skull after what appeared to be complex cranial surgery. For Cabrera, these were not the works of idle hands. He argued that the stones formed a kind of library, an archive of a civilization that had faced the threat of extinction and sought to preserve its knowledge for the distant future. He believed that the people behind these carvings had not only lived among the dinosaurs, but had also developed technologies rivaling our own, perhaps even surpassing them in some fields. To him, they were the proof that humanity's story was far older and far stranger than we were taught. Yet, to the academic world, Cabrera's claims bordered on heresy. Archaeologists dismissed the stones outright, pointing to the confessions of local farmers who admitted to crafting them. The farmers themselves explained the process in detail, how they used simple tools to scratch the designs, then coated the stones in dust to mimic the effect of age. They claimed they had simply copied images from books, including dinosaur illustrations from popular magazines. It seemed like an open and shut case, but a handful of researchers were not satisfied with that explanation. How could a few farmers without access to any formal training produce thousands of such complex carvings, many of which contained details that, according to mainstream science, were not known until decades later? The sheer volume of the stones posed a logistical problem for the forgery theory. Cabrera's collection alone numbered over 11,000 stones. Then there was the matter of the patina, the thin layer of oxidation and mineral buildup that covered the carvings. Under magnification, some stones appeared to show patina inside the grooves, suggesting the etchings were not recent at all, but had aged along with the stones themselves. Such findings, however, were fiercely debated, with skeptics claiming contamination or environmental factors could produce the same effect. The deeper one looked into the Ica stones, the more the mystery seemed to twist. Every attempt to close the book on them only seemed to open another chapter. And for Cabrera, the stakes were more than academic. He believed he was safeguarding the final testament of a world that had been lost twice, once to the cataclysms of prehistory and again to the selective memory of modern science. In time, the Ica stones began to attract attention beyond Peru. Journalists, amateur archaeologists, and the curious public traveled to see Cabrera's collection for themselves. Some came hoping to witness proof of a forgotten chapter in human history. Others came determined to expose the stones as an elaborate hoax. The reactions were rarely neutral. Those who believed left in awe, their minds alive with possibilities. They spoke of the precision of the carvings, the consistency of the imagery across thousands of stones, and the improbable scope of such a project if it were nothing more than a scheme to fool tourists. Skeptics, however, pointed to inconsistencies, the varying artistic styles, the occasional appearance of imagery suspiciously similar to modern illustrations, and the undeniable testimony of the local farmers who claimed authorship. The Peruvian authorities were not pleased with the growing international interest. A national law made it illegal to remove pre-Columbian artifacts from the country, and for a time, the Ica stones were officially classified under that category. But, as doubts about their authenticity mounted, the government quietly reclassified them as forgeries. This legal shift had an unintended effect. It allowed the stones to be sold freely, which in turn encouraged more villagers to carve new ones for profit. This flood of modern copies muddied the waters even further. Genuine or not, Cabrera's original stones became tangled in a growing sea of imitations. For the casual observer, distinguishing between them was nearly impossible. To the skeptics, this only reinforced the narrative that the entire phenomenon was a product of local craftsmanship and entrepreneurial spirit. To the believers, it was a deliberate act of obfuscation, a way to bury the truth under a pile of fakes until no one could tell the difference. There were other questions, too, questions that went beyond the carvings themselves. If the stones were truly ancient, why had they been found scattered rather than concentrated in a single archaeological site? Why was there no clear record of their discovery before the 20th century? Cabrera's answer was that they had been intentionally hidden, distributed in secret caches to survive a coming cataclysm. And over the centuries, erosion, farming, and chance had brought them back to the surface. His theory was dramatic, even apocalyptic. He believed the civilization behind the Ica stones had foreseen its own destruction, perhaps through cosmic impact, geological upheaval, or disease, and had left behind these carved records as a warning for the distant future. To him, the dinosaurs depicted on the stones were not symbolic or imagined. They were a record of real creatures his ancient people had known and studied. And the surgical scenes were not fantasy, but fact. Evidence that these long-lost humans had mastered the art of medicine far earlier than modern history would allow. It was a vision of the past that defied every rule of archaeology. And yet, staring into the intricate carvings, one could not help but feel the faint pull of possibility. By the late 1990s, Dr. Cabrera had spent decades defending the stones. His collection had grown into one of the most unusual private archives in the world. Over 11,000 pieces, each one meticulously cataloged, many displayed in glass cases inside his home. For him, the stones were not just artifacts, they were a mission, a responsibility. He believed he had been chosen, perhaps by fate, perhaps by the very civilization that had carved them, to safeguard their message until the world was ready to hear it. Visitors often spoke of the way Cabrera presented the stones. He would lift one carefully as though it were fragile despite its weight, tracing the carved lines with his fingertips. His voice would slow, and his eyes would seem to look not at the stone, but through it, into the world he believed it came from. A world where humans and dinosaurs shared the same landscape. A world where surgeons could replace a heart with the skill of a modern operating room. A world where the knowledge of the stars was not only known, but carved into memory long before recorded history. But time was against him. Cabrera passed away in 2001, leaving behind a legacy of mystery. His collection remained in Ica, preserved by his family, but without his presence, the stones slowly faded from international attention. To the mainstream scientific community, the Ica stones were already closed history, a cautionary tale about the dangers of pseudoscience and wishful thinking. To believers, they were more important than ever, their unanswered questions still hanging in the air, waiting for someone brave enough to challenge the official record. And so, the debate endures. Are the Ica stones merely an elaborate 20th century forgery, folk art that spiraled into legend? Or are they the remnants of a civilization erased from history, its knowledge surviving only in carved rock? When you stand before them, the air dry and still, your hand hovering over the cool, dark surface, the carvings seem to whisper, not words, but something older, deeper, an invitation, a question, a warning. And in that moment, it does not matter what the experts say or what the skeptics believe. You are left with the same unshakable thought that haunted Cabrera for the rest of his life. What if they are real? The Ica stones leave us with more questions than answers, but they are not alone. Across the world, other discoveries have surfaced, objects that seem too advanced, too precise, to belong to the time they came from. And one of the most extraordinary of them all lay hidden for 2,000 years at the bottom of the Mediterranean Sea. The Antikythera mechanism, the computer of the ancient world. The sea around the Greek island of Antikythera is as beautiful as it is treacherous. From the surface, it is a tapestry of sapphire and turquoise, rippling beneath the Mediterranean sun. But beneath those waters lies a jagged underworld of rocks and reefs, a labyrinth that has claimed countless ships over the centuries. It was in the spring of 1900 that a group of sponge divers sheltering from a storm decided to explore these depths. Among them was a diver named Elias Stadiatis, who would soon make one of the most important accidental discoveries in the history of archaeology. As he descended into the gloom, the sunlight above dissolved into shadow, and the world became cold and silent, broken only by the sound of his own breathing. Then, through the drifting silt, he saw something impossible. What looked like the lifeless body of a man draped in the tattered remains of armor. It was not a corpse, but a statue, bronze, its face frozen in an expression of defiance, its surface coated in centuries of marine growth. Around it lay a scatter of treasures, amphorae, coins, marble fragments, and the skeletal remains of a great ship. The divers had found an ancient wreck, later dated to around 70 to 60 BCE. For weeks, they worked with the Greek government to haul the cargo from the depths, piece by piece. Statues of gods and heroes, delicate glassware, and other wonders emerged into the daylight for the first time in nearly 2,000 years. Among these treasures was something far less striking to the eye, a lump of corroded bronze barely recognizable beneath its crust of green oxidation. It was small, fractured into several irregular pieces, and was set aside with other debris for study. For 2 years it sat in the National Archaeological Museum in Athens, overlooked and unremarkable, until in 1902 an archaeologist named Valerios Stais examined it closely and noticed something extraordinary. Embedded within the corroded metal were the teeth of finely crafted gears. Not one or two, but dozens. This was no ornament, no statue fragment. It was a machine. The discovery was baffling. At the time, the oldest known gear-driven devices in Europe dated to the medieval period, over 1,000 years after the Antikythera shipwreck. The idea that the ancient Greeks could have built something so mechanically complex was almost unthinkable. Yet here it was, a compact assembly of interlocking gears, axles, and inscriptions, all fashioned with astonishing precision. The initial reaction was disbelief. Some scholars suggested it must have been of more recent origin, perhaps accidentally included with the ancient cargo. But the mineral encrustations matched those on the other artifacts from the wreck, and the inscriptions were unmistakably in ancient Greek. Slowly, the truth became unavoidable. This device had been built more than 2,000 years ago. Still, its purpose remained a mystery. The corroded fragments revealed only hints. A few partial inscriptions, gear teeth worn but still sharp in places, traces of scales and pointers. The arrangement was too complex for a simple clock, too intricate for a navigational tool. In 1905, German philologist Albert Rem made a bold suggestion. It was an astronomical device designed to calculate the positions of the sun and moon. His proposal was met with skepticism, but as more fragments were studied, the evidence began to support his claim. Even so, no one at the time could fully grasp the sophistication of what they were looking at. The Industrial Revolution had only recently brought complex gearing into the modern world. To find such technology in the ruins of an ancient shipwreck was like finding a smartphone buried in the ruins of Pompeii. The Antikythera mechanism, as it would come to be known, posed a problem for history itself. If the Greeks had built machines of this complexity, what else had they achieved that had not survived? And if such knowledge existed in the ancient world, how had it been lost for centuries, leaving no trace in the historical record until now? The questions hung over the artifact like a shroud. It was as though the gears themselves were whispering a secret that would take a century to begin to understand. For decades after its discovery, the Antikythera mechanism remained an enigma. The fragments, corroded, fragile, and incomplete, were kept in controlled storage, studied occasionally by scholars, intrigued by its complexity. But without the ability to see inside the solid mass of bronze and mineral, progress was slow. The true nature of the device was locked away, like a book written in a language no one could read. In the early years, scholars debated its possible uses. Some thought it might have been a kind of advanced astrolabe, a tool for navigation at sea. Others speculated it was an elaborate calendar or even a teaching device for explaining the motion of celestial bodies. But every theory seemed to fall short of explaining its full intricacy. The breakthrough came many decades later with the arrival of modern imaging technology. In the early 2000s, a team of international researchers launched what became known as the Antikythera Mechanism Research Project. They used high-resolution X-ray tomography and surface imaging to peer inside the corroded lumps without damaging them. What they found stunned even the most cautious scholars. Beneath the encrustations was a clockwork universe, a series of more than 30 precisely cut bronze gears, arranged in a complex interlocking pattern. Each gear was crafted with teeth so fine that their tolerances rivaled those of modern engineering. Inscriptions long hidden from view emerged from the darkness, faint, ancient Greek text etched into the metal, giving instructions for its use. The inscriptions spoke of the sun, the moon, the planets, and the cycles of eclipses. The gears were designed not only to track the positions of celestial bodies, but to predict them, calculating where they would be in the sky at any given time. The mechanism could even model the irregular orbit of the moon, a level of astronomical understanding not thought possible for ancient civilizations. As the researchers reconstructed the gear trains, a new picture emerged. The Antikythera mechanism was, in effect, an ancient computer, an analog device capable of processing complex astronomical calculations. By turning a hand crank, the user could set a date, and the mechanism would display the positions of the sun and moon, the phases of the moon, and the timing of eclipses. Some evidence suggested it may have tracked the positions of the 5 known planets as well. This was not just a navigational aid. It was a miniature model of the cosmos, built over 2 millennia ago. Its sophistication was so advanced that nothing comparable would appear again in Europe until the development of mechanical clocks in the 14th century, more than 1,000 years later. The implications were profound. To create such a device required not only advanced metalworking skills, but also a deep understanding of mathematics, astronomy, and precision engineering. It meant that at least some ancient Greek artisans possessed knowledge and techniques far ahead of their time. But the discovery also posed a haunting question. If such technology existed in the ancient world, why had it disappeared? Why were there no surviving records of its design or construction, no other examples found in archaeological digs? Was the Antikythera mechanism a rare masterpiece, the product of a single genius whose secrets died with them? Or was it part of a larger tradition, one that was deliberately erased or lost through the upheavals of history? The deeper the researchers looked, the stranger the story became. The device's astronomical calculations seemed to be rooted in Babylonian mathematical methods, yet its construction was unmistakably Greek. Its wooden case had long rotted away, but traces suggested it might once have been decorated, perhaps even displayed to an audience. Some scholars speculated that it was used not just for practical purposes, but as a demonstration, proof of the elegance and order of the cosmos, meant to inspire awe. And then there was the shipwreck itself. What was this remarkable machine doing aboard a vessel loaded with statues, luxury goods, and treasures? Was it being transported to a wealthy patron? Was it a gift or a prize of war? Or was it part of a collection? One artifact among many on its way to a place where it would be hidden from the eyes of history? The Antikythera mechanism had survived for over 2,000 years at the bottom of the sea, but its secrets were only beginning to surface. Each revelation led to another mystery, another unanswered question. And as the researchers pieced together its design, they began to realize that they were not merely studying a machine. They were glimpsing a fragment of a lost world. By the time the Antikythera mechanism research project reached its peak, it was clear that this was not a simple tool for sailors. This was an object born from a fusion of science, art, and philosophy, a manifestation of the ancient Greek belief that the universe was an ordered, harmonious system, one that could be understood and even replicated through human ingenuity. The X-ray scans revealed something even more astonishing: tiny, meticulously etched inscriptions hidden on the inner surfaces of the plates. These were not decorative flourishes, they were detailed operating instructions. In an era when literacy was limited and technical manuals were rare, the fact that this device carried step-by-step guidance in text suggested it was meant to be used by someone with a deep knowledge of astronomy, perhaps even a scholar or philosopher rather than a craftsman or navigator. The inscriptions referred to cycles known to the ancient Babylonians, such as the Saros cycle, used to predict eclipses, and the Metonic cycle, which reconciled lunar months with solar years. This blending of Greek mechanical expertise and Mesopotamian astronomical knowledge hinted at a level of cultural and scientific exchange far more complex than traditional history allows. One dial on the mechanism tracked the 19-year Metonic cycle, another the 223-month Saros cycle. A smaller subsidiary dial even predicted the occurrence of lunar and solar eclipses, marking them with different glyphs to distinguish between total, partial, and annular events. The back panel contained a spiral calendar of months, adjusted for leap years, another sign of advanced calendrical understanding. The more the researchers reconstructed the device, the more it began to look like a portable observatory, a machine capable of compressing the vast movements of the heavens into a scale small enough to hold in one's hands. But the sophistication of the Antikythera mechanism raised uncomfortable questions. The level of precision required to cut its bronze gears was extraordinary. The teeth had to be shaped and spaced with near-perfect accuracy, or the calculations would quickly drift into error. This was not the work of a trial-and-error tinkerer. Whoever built this machine understood the mathematics of gear ratios intimately and had the tools to execute that knowledge with a degree of accuracy difficult to achieve even in the modern workshop without advanced equipment. And yet, after the wreck of the Antikythera ship, there is no clear record of such technology for more than 1,000 years. Historians refer to this as a technological discontinuity, an invention so far ahead of its time that it appears, vanishes, and leaves no lineage behind. Some scholars argue that other devices like the Antikythera mechanism must have existed, perhaps stored in libraries or temples, and were simply lost in the fires and wars that swept the ancient world. Others suggest that this kind of craftsmanship was reserved for a tiny elite, perhaps even guarded as a state secret, limiting the spread of the knowledge and making it more vulnerable to extinction when that elite fell. There are even those who wonder whether this was the product of a single mechanical genius, an Archimedes-like figure whose skill died with him. The ancient writer Cicero mentioned that Archimedes had built a device capable of reproducing the motions of the sun, moon, and planets. Could the Antikythera mechanism be a descendant or even a surviving example of such legendary craftsmanship? If so, then its journey to the bottom of the sea becomes even more intriguing. Was it stolen during the Roman conquest of Greece, taken as plunder from a temple or workshop? Was it being transported to Rome as a prize, intended for the private collection of a wealthy statesman or emperor? Or had it been sent away to protect it, to keep it from falling into the wrong hands? Each possibility carries its own implications, and none can be proven. All we know for certain is that the ship carrying it sank in violent weather sometime in the 1st century BCE, consigning its precious cargo to the deep. For nearly 2,000 years, the Mediterranean kept its secret. But the Antikythera mechanism would not remain silent forever. The final stages of its modern study would reveal still more about its creators, and about the possibility that it was only one fragment of a much larger, hidden story in the history of human invention. As the last pieces of the puzzle came together, the Antikythera mechanism's complexity became undeniable. Using advanced digital reconstructions, researchers were able to create working models of the device, allowing modern hands to turn the same kind of crank that an ancient user would have turned over 2 millennia ago. The experience was nothing short of humbling. With a smooth rotation, the gears came alive, their bronze teeth interlocking with precision, moving dials and pointers across ancient scales. The front displayed the zodiac, the path of the sun through the constellations, and the changing phases of the moon. The back revealed the spiraling calendar of the Metonic cycle, the prediction of eclipses, and the complex interplay of cycles known to ancient astronomers. Even with our modern technology, reconstructing the device took years. And yet, someone in the ancient world had not only built it, but done so with hand tools, working in workshops lit by sunlight and oil lamps. This was more than engineering, it was artistry. For many researchers, the most haunting realization was this: the Antikythera mechanism was likely not unique. The skill and understanding required to produce it could not have emerged from nothing. It had to have predecessors, prototypes, earlier versions, experiments. Perhaps there were other devices, more advanced still, that have simply not survived the centuries. The ancient world was filled with war, conquest, and the destruction of knowledge. The burning of libraries, the looting of temples, and the slow decay of neglected treasures could easily have erased any trace of such machines. And then there is the tantalizing possibility that what we have found is but a fragment of a greater whole. Some scholars suggest the Antikythera mechanism may once have been part of a larger instrument, a multi-panel device with even greater capabilities, tracking not just the moon and sun, but the known planets, the rising and setting of stars, and perhaps even celestial events far more distant and rare. The more we learn, the more the device forces us to reconsider our assumptions about the ancient world. History books often portray technological progress as a straight line, slow, steady, and inevitable. But the Antikythera mechanism tells a different story, one of leaps forward into brilliance followed by sudden, devastating loss. It suggests that knowledge can vanish entirely, leaving future generations to rediscover what was once common understanding. It also raises deeper questions. Who decided what knowledge survived and what was allowed to fade? Was the disappearance of such technology a natural consequence of time, or was it intentional, erased by those who feared its power or sought to control it? In the end, the Antikythera mechanism stands as both a marvel and a warning. A marvel because it reveals the staggering capabilities of ancient minds. A warning because it reminds us that even the greatest achievements can vanish into obscurity, hidden for centuries beneath the waves or buried under the sands of history. And so, when we speak of the mysteries of the past, we must remember, sometimes the most incredible truths are not the ones we imagine, but the ones we have already forgotten. But the Antikythera mechanism is only one of many artifacts that defy explanation. Far from the warm waters of Greece, in dusty archives and in ancient maps drawn on worn parchment lies another enigma, one that charts lands no modern explorer should have known existed. Maps are supposed to tell us where we are and where we've been. They are records of exploration, of coastlines traced by ship, of mountains crossed on foot, of rivers followed from source to sea. But some maps tell a different story, a story of places charted long before anyone should have been able to see them. The most famous of these is the Piri Reis map, drawn in 1513 by an Ottoman admiral and cartographer named Piri ibn Haji Mehmed, known to history simply as Piri Reis. His chart was not an idle sketch, but a masterwork of navigation covering the western coasts of Europe and Africa and the eastern coast of South America. It was compiled from older maps, some recent, some ancient, some whose origins Piri himself could not identify. For centuries, the map lay largely forgotten until it was rediscovered in 1929 in the Topkapi Palace in Istanbul. When scholars examined it, they were startled to find features that did not fit the knowledge of the early 16th century. Most strikingly, at the southern edge of the parchment, beyond the tip of South America, was a landmass that appeared to resemble the coast of Antarctica. This, in itself, might have been dismissed as artistic speculation, except for one detail: the coastline was shown without ice. In 1513, Antarctica had not yet been officially discovered by any European explorer. And in the modern era, its true shape beneath the ice was not revealed until the 20th century using seismic surveys. How, then, could an Ottoman admiral in the early 1500s have drawn it so accurately? Supporters of the impossible maps theory argue that Piri Reis must have had access to charts created in a time when Antarctica was ice-free, a time that mainstream geology places at least 6,000 years before recorded history, possibly far longer. Critics counter that the resemblance is coincidental, that the southern coastline might simply represent an exaggerated depiction of South America distorted by the limitations of ancient projection methods. But the Piri Reis map is not alone. Other cartographic anomalies suggest that some ancient mapmakers possessed knowledge far beyond their supposed reach. The Oronce Fine map of 1531, for example, also depicts a remarkably detailed southern continent, again with features that seem to align with modern surveys of Antarctica's subglacial coastlines. The Boache map of 1737 shows inland waterways and mountains in Antarctica that correspond to features discovered under the ice only in the 20th century. How could this be? Were these details the product of guesswork and coincidence? Or did they come from older sources, passed down through generations, copied and recopied until their origin was forgotten? Some researchers have proposed that ancient seafaring civilizations, perhaps unknown to history, explored the southern oceans long before the age of European discovery. Others speculate that advanced knowledge of geography might have survived from a lost culture, one erased by catastrophe, leaving only fragments preserved in maps and artifacts. Piri Reis himself, in notes written directly on his map, stated that he had drawn it using about 20 source charts, some from his own time, others from earlier centuries, and at least one, he claimed, dated back to the time of Alexander the Great. If this was true, then the lineage of some of his sources might stretch deep into the ancient world, carrying forward information from civilizations whose very names have been lost. The map also includes curious inaccuracies. Parts of South America are shown far too far east, and the scale of certain coastlines seems distorted. Yet even these oddities have been interpreted as evidence of something strange, signs that the original data had been mapped on a spherical projection long before such cartographic techniques were supposedly invented and then poorly adapted to flat parchment. Mainstream historians often dismiss these interpretations as romantic speculation, the result of imposing modern ideas onto imperfect old maps. But, to those willing to look deeper, the anomalies remain stubborn, refusing to vanish under easy explanations. The more one studies the impossible maps, the more it begins to seem as if they are not mistakes at all, but the fading echoes of an older, more complete knowledge of the world. And the Piri Reis map is only the beginning. Across Europe, the Middle East, and even parts of Asia, other maps have surfaced, each carrying its own peculiar blend of accuracy and impossibility. Together they form a puzzle that, if solved, might redraw the boundaries of human history. If the Piri Reis map was a whisper from the past, then the Oronce Fine map of 1531 was a shout. Created by a French mathematician and cartographer, Oronce Fine, this world map contains a massive landmass labeled Terra Australis, a southern continent that, in theory, was based only on speculation. In the early 16th century, European mapmakers believed that such a land must exist to balance the known continents of the Northern Hemisphere, but they had no direct evidence of its shape or features. Yet, Fine's rendering of this mysterious southern land is unsettlingly precise. His depiction includes not only an extensive coastline, but also rivers, mountain ranges, and bays, details that should have been unknowable to him. To the casual eye, the continent looks suspiciously like Antarctica, again shown largely free of ice. The mountain ranges on Fine's map align closely with the transantarctic mountains revealed in modern satellite and radar imagery, while the placement of bays and inlets echoes those found beneath the continent's frozen crust. Mainstream historians explain this away as coincidence, arguing that Fine's representation was the product of geographical imagination, based on partial reports from southern voyages combined with the era's cartographic conventions. But such coincidences become harder to dismiss when multiple maps, created decades or even centuries apart, display similar and equally improbable details. Another striking example is the Boache map of 1737, drawn by French geographer Philippe Boache. Unlike most maps of its time, Boache's chart of the southern continent shows a division down the middle, splitting it into two large land masses with a long channel running between them. This split mirrors the actual geological structure of Antarctica as we know it today, two major ice-covered land masses divided by the Transantarctic Mountains and the Ross and Weddell Seas. Modern science only confirmed this in the mid-20th century using seismic and radar surveys. How could Boache have known? Boache claimed to have based his work on ancient maps, perhaps passed down through explorers or preserved in forgotten archives. If his sources were indeed ancient, then they would have required someone in the distant past to map the Antarctic coastline without its current blanket of ice. According to ice core studies, the last time Antarctica's coasts were ice-free may have been more than 6,000 years ago, long before recorded history, and certainly before any known civilization had the ability to survey such a region. Skeptics argue that these similarities can be explained by projection distortions or by cartographers' tendency to fill in the blanks using imaginative geography. But the level of detail, especially in inland features, continues to trouble researchers who are open to less conventional explanations. If the shapes on these maps are not coincidences, then the data must have come from somewhere, and that somewhere might lie far deeper in the human past than we currently acknowledge. Even outside of Antarctica, impossible maps appear in strange places. The Xenomap of 1380, for example, depicts parts of Greenland and the Canadian Arctic in ways that seem to suggest direct observation, centuries before European explorers officially reached them. The Dulcet Map of 1339 shows parts of the African coastline with a degree of accuracy that should have been beyond the capabilities of medieval navigation. And the Cantino Planisphere of 1502 includes parts of South America and Africa in near-perfect proportion, despite being produced at a time when large portions of these continents had not yet been explored in detail. One theory, controversial but persistent, is that these maps are surviving fragments of a global maritime knowledge network that existed in deep antiquity, perhaps in the form of a pre-Ice Age seafaring civilization. Proponents suggest that as glaciers melted and sea levels rose, most coastal settlements were submerged, leaving only scattered survivors to carry fragments of this knowledge into the future. Over time, the data was copied and recopied, often misunderstood, until it found its way into the hands of medieval and Renaissance mapmakers. If this theory holds any truth, it would mean that the familiar narrative of human history, one of gradual linear advancement, may be incomplete. Instead, there may have been earlier peaks of knowledge and technology, followed by catastrophic losses that forced humanity to start again from near zero. In this view, maps like those of Piri Reis, Orance Fine, and Boache are not anomalies, they are survivors. Of course, such ideas remain outside the mainstream, in part because hard evidence of such a civilization has yet to be found. But the maps themselves, stubbornly resistant to easy explanation, continue to beckon to anyone willing to consider that the past may hold secrets far older than we imagine. And if these are merely the surviving scraps of a once vast body of knowledge, one cannot help but wonder what has been lost entirely. The persistence of these cartographic anomalies forces us to confront an uncomfortable possibility: that our record of exploration is incomplete, and that much of what we consider discovery might instead be rediscovery. The evidence does not lie solely in the most famous maps, but in dozens of lesser-known examples hidden in archives and private collections, maps that contain hints of forgotten coastlines, strangely accurate depictions of far-off lands, or even records of islands that no longer exist. Take, for instance, the ancient Portolan charts of the Mediterranean and Atlantic coasts. Portolan maps first appeared in Europe in the 13th century with an accuracy that seemed to leap far ahead of earlier medieval attempts. Their coastlines are so precise that in some regions they differ from modern maps by only a fraction of a degree. Conventional history explains this as the result of improved navigation techniques and the accumulation of sailors' observations. But some researchers believe that their precision hints at even older sources, charts drawn with a knowledge of longitude that officially was not mastered until centuries later. Longitude, unlike latitude, cannot be determined by the position of the sun or stars alone. It requires accurate timekeeping. In the modern world, this was achieved only in the 18th century with the invention of the marine chronometer. Yet, the alignment of certain features on Portolan charts suggests that whoever first drew them understood longitude well enough to map vast distances with remarkable accuracy. If this is true, then the maps must have been copied from an earlier source, one belonging to a culture capable of global navigation long before such achievements appear in recorded history. Another mystery arises in the depiction of certain islands in the middle of the Atlantic, landmasses such as Antillia, High Brazil, and St. Brendan's Island. These places appear on multiple maps from different centuries, often in similar locations, yet they do not exist today. Were these purely mythical lands, the products of sailors' tales and cartographers' imagination? Or could they have been real islands that have since sunk beneath the waves, victims of rising sea levels or geological upheaval? The Mid-Atlantic Ridge, after all, is a tectonically active region, and while catastrophic subsidence events are rare, they are not impossible. The same phenomenon appears in the Pacific, where certain early maps show islands in positions that do not match modern geography. Some of these could be navigational errors, but others are so consistent across different charts that they raise suspicion. In the context of lost civilizations, these phantom islands have been woven into theories about Lemuria, Mu, and other hypothesized prehistoric cultures. What complicates matters further is the way knowledge was transmitted in the ancient and medieval worlds. Maps were not always drawn to reflect first-hand exploration. They were often composites, stitched together from multiple sources, including oral traditions and travelers' reports. This creates a paradox. Some details could be wildly inaccurate, while others, drawn from genuine ancient records, could be uncannily precise. Separating the two is a task that requires not only skill but also a willingness to question conventional timelines. The Peary Race map itself bears witness to this process. Along its margins, Peary wrote extensive notes explaining where he had obtained his data. Some came from contemporary voyages, Portuguese and Spanish explorations of the New World. Others, however, came from maps far older, inherited from the time of Alexander or drawn by ancient seafarers whose identities he did not know. This blending of modern and ancient data might explain why certain portions of his map are spot-on accurate, while others are distorted or speculative. Skeptics argue that none of this requires a lost civilization. They point out that ancient sailors could have reached far-off lands by chance, and that coastlines could be mapped in detail over generations of exploration, but this explanation still leaves gaps, especially when it comes to the Antarctic problem. Even if we grant that ancient mariners could have charted distant coasts, the depiction of Antarctica without ice demands an entirely different level of knowledge and antiquity, placing its mapping thousands of years before the rise of any known advanced culture. The debate remains unresolved. On one side are those who see the impossible maps as tantalizing evidence of a deep, forgotten chapter in human history, a chapter that includes global navigation, precise mapping, and perhaps even a scientific understanding of the planet's shape and dimensions. On the other are those who see nothing more than coincidence, artistic license, and the patchwork nature of medieval map-making. Yet even for the skeptics, the allure of these maps is hard to deny. They are, at the very least, historical puzzles, mysteries that invite curiosity and speculation. For those willing to entertain the possibility of an ancient seafaring civilization, they are clues, scattered like breadcrumbs across centuries, pointing toward a world that once was and could be again. The mystery of the impossible maps is not only about what they show, but about what they suggest. If they are genuine echoes of an older knowledge, then they imply a level of organization, communication, and technology in the ancient world that we have yet to fully grasp. They suggest that someone, not a lone explorer but a culture, had the means to travel the globe, record its coastlines, and preserve that information for centuries, perhaps millennia. This is where the maps intersect with another enduring mystery: the disappearance of knowledge. Throughout history, moments of great intellectual achievement have been followed by periods of collapse: the fall of Rome, the burning of the Library of Alexandria, the decline of the Maya. Each time, libraries are emptied, scrolls and codices destroyed, and centuries of accumulated wisdom vanish into the ashes. If the cartographic anomalies are indeed the remnants of a much older knowledge system, then they may be survivors of one or more of these collapses, saved, copied, and passed down in fragments until they were absorbed into the records of later civilizations. This would explain why some details are stunningly accurate while others are crude or incorrect. The originals were perfect, but the copies degraded with each generation, distorted by the limited understanding of their custodians. Some modern researchers have tried to reverse engineer these maps using digital projection tools to match them against modern geography. The results are fascinating. When certain distortions are corrected, accounting for the curvature of the Earth and ancient projection methods, the coastlines of the mystery continents align even more closely with their real-world counterparts. In some cases, this correction reveals details such as mountain ranges or river deltas that could only have been known through direct observation. One striking example comes from reanalyzing the Boache map. When adjusted for distortion, the waterways and inland seas he drew correspond almost exactly to subglacial features of Antarctica revealed by modern radar surveys. This has led some to suggest that Boache, or the source he copied from, had access to geological information we could not have obtained until the second half of the 20th century. For skeptics, the simplest explanation remains that such similarities are the result of guesswork and coincidence, amplified by the human tendency to see patterns where none exist. They remind us that mapmakers of the Renaissance and earlier often filled unknown spaces with speculative coastlines, mythical islands, or imagined continents, making it easy for later observers to read unintended accuracy into them. And yet, if it is all coincidence, then it is a coincidence repeated with such precision across so many different maps that it becomes almost indistinguishable from intent. The real challenge of the impossible maps is that they demand a choice. Either the cartographers of the past were far more skilled and well-traveled than we currently believe, or they inherited knowledge from a source so old and so advanced that it has otherwise disappeared from the record. Either answer forces us to rethink the way we view the past. Perhaps one day new discoveries will surface, an intact ancient map preserved against all odds, or physical evidence of a civilization capable of such feats. Until then, the impossible maps remain exactly what their name suggests: impossible, and yet undeniably real. But coastlines and continents are not the only traces left by civilizations we do not understand. In the highlands of South America, in the deserts of the Middle East, and across the stones of ancient cities, there are marks of another kind, signs of builders whose skills defy explanation even today. But coastlines and continents are not the only traces left by civilizations we do not understand. In the highlands of South America, in the deserts of the Middle East, and across the stones of ancient cities, there are marks of another kind, signs of builders whose skills defy explanation even today. Some artifacts defy history not through what they depict, but through what they are. They are not delicate carvings or fragile parchment maps, but massive blocks of stone, so large, so heavy, and so precisely cut that even today, with modern cranes and diamond-tipped saws, we would struggle to replicate them. To walk among such structures is to feel small, not only in size, but in understanding. The air seems heavier around them, as though the stones themselves are aware of their defiance, aware that they should not exist in the form they do, at the time they do. One of the most famous of these enigmas lies in the mountains of Lebanon, the ruins of Baalbek. Here, in the heart of the Bekaa Valley, stands the Temple of Jupiter, built by the Romans nearly 2,000 years ago. The columns still rise in fragments toward the sky, each one an elegant testament to Roman architecture. But below them, forming the foundation of the site, lie stones that predate the Romans by an unknown span of time. These foundation blocks, known as the trilithon, are each estimated to weigh around 800 metric tons. They are perfectly fitted together, their surface is smooth and straight, without the use of mortar. To put this into perspective, The heaviest blocks used in the Great Pyramid of Giza weigh about 80 tons, less than 1/10 the weight of the Baalbek stones. Even today, moving such monoliths would require specialized cranes, transport systems, and meticulous planning. And yet, whoever placed the trilithon did so with such precision that the stones rest snugly against each other, with gaps so fine a sheet of paper cannot slip between them. The Romans, despite their engineering brilliance, never attempted to move blocks of this size for construction. They simply built on top of what was already there. This raises the question, who cut, transported, and set these colossal stones in place? And why? A short distance from the main temple lies an even more astonishing piece, the so-called Stone of the Pregnant Woman. Partially buried in the earth, this unfinished block is estimated to weigh over 1,000 tons. Nearby, a second, even larger stone has been found, potentially weighing close to 1,650 tons. These were never moved from their quarry, but their existence proves that whoever worked here had the capability, or at least the ambition, to manipulate stone on a scale that borders on the impossible. Mainstream archaeology generally attributes these blocks to the Romans or earlier local builders, suggesting that with enough manpower, levers, and ingenuity, such feats were achievable. And yet, the logistics remain daunting. Moving an 800-ton stone over uneven terrain without modern machinery is not just difficult, it is perilously close to unthinkable. Experiments with smaller stones have shown that even with hundreds of workers, ropes, and wooden rollers, the process is slow, dangerous, and prone to failure. The mysteries of Baalbek are echoed elsewhere in the world, thousands of miles away in the high Andes of Peru and Bolivia. Here, at sites like Sacsayhuaman, Ollantaytambo, and Pumapunku, the stones are not only massive but shaped and fitted with an accuracy that defies explanation. At Sacsayhuaman, enormous polygonal blocks, some weighing over 100 tons, interlock like pieces of a giant jigsaw puzzle. The seams between them are so precise that even without mortar, the walls have withstood centuries of earthquakes. At Ollantaytambo, several huge blocks sit atop a mountain terrace, their surfaces smoothed as if by a machine, their edges crisp and exact. Some of these stones are believed to have been quarried from a site several kilometers away, across a river valley and up steep inclines. Moving them would have been a formidable challenge even with modern equipment, let alone with the tools and techniques attributed to the Inca. And then there is Pumapunku, part of the Tiwanaku complex in Bolivia. Here, the stones are not merely large, they are crafted with geometric precision that borders on the mechanical. Perfect right angles, drill holes, and intricate cuts suggest a level of craftsmanship more at home in a modern workshop than in a pre-Columbian civilization. Some of the andesite blocks weigh up to 130 tons, and the red sandstone slabs are even heavier. The orthodox explanation is that these stones were shaped with simple tools, hammerstones, chisels, and abrasive sand, and moved using a combination of ramps, sledges, and human labor. But to many who have studied them, the idea that such flawless cuts and joins could be achieved without advanced tools is difficult to accept. The surfaces are too smooth, the angles too sharp, and the fit too perfect. Whether in Lebanon or South America, these megaliths share three common traits: extraordinary size, precise workmanship, and mysterious origins. They stand as silent challenges to our understanding of the past, daring us to explain not just how they were built, but who possessed the knowledge, skill, and will to build them. And as we will see, the more we look into these stones, the more we begin to suspect that their existence may point to a forgotten chapter of human history, a chapter in which our ancestors were far more capable than we have been led to believe. In studying these megaliths, one is struck by more than just their size. It is the precision of their construction, their almost obsessive perfection, that truly unsettles our understanding of the past. Across the world, in cultures separated by vast distances and thousands of years, we see the same mastery of stone, the same defiance of what should have been possible with the tools and technology of their time. Take, for example, the polygonal masonry of Sacsayhuaman in Peru. From a distance, the massive walls appear almost chaotic, stones of irregular shapes fitted together in seemingly random fashion. But as you approach, the pattern becomes undeniable. Each block is a unique shape, cut to interlock perfectly with its neighbors, creating a wall that is as strong today as it was centuries ago. There are no visible gaps, no mortar. The stones fit so tightly that even a thin blade cannot slip between them. How was this done? The orthodox explanation is that the builders shaped each stone through a laborious process of trial and error, placing it, removing it, chipping away, and replacing it until the fit was exact. This, in theory, could be achieved with hammerstones, chisels, and patience. But at this scale, blocks weighing tens to hundreds of tons, it becomes an engineering nightmare. Moving each block multiple times to adjust its fit would have required extraordinary effort. Even more baffling is the evidence of advanced shaping techniques. Some stones show smooth, almost polished surfaces, as if they were worked with high-powered tools or subjected to a process capable of softening the stone. Others display perfectly flat planes or sharp interior angles, features difficult to produce even today without industrial machinery. Pumapunku in Bolivia takes this enigma to another level. The site contains massive andesite blocks carved into intricate modular shapes. H-shaped stones with precise recesses, grooves, and drilled holes. The cuts are clean, the angles exact, and the measurements consistent across multiple blocks. Such precision would be challenging to achieve even with modern diamond saws and milling equipment. Yet, the Tiwanaku culture, to which the site is attributed, is not believed to have possessed metal tools capable of such work. Some researchers have proposed that the builders of Pumapunku used a technique known as geopolymer stone casting, essentially creating a type of ancient concrete by pouring a stone slurry into molds. This could explain the uniformity and precision, but geological studies of the andesite blocks have found no conclusive evidence of reconstituted stone. They appear to be solid, natural rock. In Egypt, the mysteries continue. At the Giza Plateau, the Great Pyramid's casing stones and interior blocks fit with such precision that the joints are almost invisible. In some cases, the gaps between stones measure less than a millimeter. In the nearby Valley Temple of Khafra, massive limestone and granite blocks, some weighing up to 200 tons, are fitted together with the same impossibly tight joins. The question remains, how were these blocks moved, shaped, and set into place with such perfection using copper chisels and wooden sledges? And then, there is the unfinished obelisk at Aswan, Egypt's great granite quarry. Still attached to the bedrock, this colossal piece would have weighed over 1,000 tons if completed. It shows clear marks of the quarrying process, parallel grooves that some believe were made by pounding with dolerite balls, though others argue they look more like the result of mechanical cutting. The obelisk's sheer size suggests that the ancient Egyptians at least attempted to move objects as massive as those at Baalbek and Pumapunku, though whether they succeeded is another question. In Japan, the massive stone structures of the Asuka region, particularly the mysterious Masuda no Iwafune, pose similar questions. This giant, partially carved granite block with its flat top and twin protrusions is unlike anything else in Japanese archaeology. Its purpose is unknown, but its workmanship suggests a high degree of skill and an ability to manipulate large stone masses with precision. Across all these sites, the common themes repeat. Enormous stone blocks, far beyond what is normally considered practical for ancient builders. Extraordinary precision, often to tolerances measured in millimeters. Lack of mortar, with stones fitted so well that they have survived centuries of earthquakes, erosion, and war. These features challenge the conventional timeline of human development. If our ancestors were truly limited to primitive tools, then these constructions represent an almost superhuman achievement. If they were not so limited, if they possessed forgotten techniques or technologies, then our history may be missing an entire chapter. As we move deeper into these mysteries, it becomes harder to dismiss them as mere accidents of history or products of brute force and persistence. The skill on display in these stones feels deliberate, confident, perhaps far older than we realize. When you look closely at these ancient stones, you start to notice patterns that go beyond mere construction. There is a philosophy to the way they were made, a commitment to permanence, to creating structures that would endure not for decades or centuries, but for thousands of years. The walls at Sacsayhuaman, the terraces of Ollantaytambo, the precision of Pumapunku, these are not the works of builders simply seeking shelter or ceremonial space. They are statements in stone, declarations that say, "We were here, we could do this." One particularly puzzling aspect is the choice of materials. At Pumapunku and Tiwanaku, the builders worked with dense andesite and red sandstone, stones that are not only extremely heavy but also notoriously difficult to cut. In Egypt, the ancient builders routinely used granite from Aswan, a stone so hard that even today it requires diamond-tipped tools for efficient shaping. Why would ancient civilizations, supposedly limited to copper chisels and stone pounders, choose such difficult materials instead of softer, more workable stone? Some researchers believe the answer lies in durability. Softer stones erode more quickly, especially in exposed environments. By using the hardest available materials, the builders ensured their work would resist weathering for millennia. But this only deepens the mystery, because to shape such stone with primitive tools would require not only immense effort, but a level of precision that frankly should have been impossible. Then there is the issue of transportation. In Peru, many of the massive blocks at Ollantaytambo appear to have been quarried from a site on the opposite side of the Urubamba River, several kilometers away. To reach their final position, these stones would have had to be dragged down steep slopes, across a river, and then hauled back up the terraces of the construction site. In Bolivia, the red sandstone of Pumapunku came from a quarry 10 kilometers away, while the dense andesite blocks were sourced from a mountain quarry 90 kilometers distant. How were these multi-ton stones moved across such distances without the wheel, without draft animals capable of such loads, and over terrain that is difficult even for modern machinery? In Lebanon, the Baalbek Trilithon presents an equally daunting challenge. The quarry from which the massive blocks were cut lies uphill from the temple site. This means the builders would have had to move the stones downhill, control their momentum, and then position them precisely in the foundation. The idea of hundreds of workers maneuvering an 800-ton block into place without modern cranes strains the imagination. And yet, these stones are not simply massive, they are precisely aligned. At Baalbek, the Trilithon sits perfectly level, with each block in seamless contact with the next. At Sacsayhuaman, the polygonal stones interlock so tightly that they have survived centuries of earthquakes that destroyed less robust structures in the same region. This level of engineering requires more than brute force. It demands advanced planning, surveying, and an intimate understanding of geometry and load-bearing principles. Modern attempts to replicate some of these feats have produced mixed results. Experimental archaeology projects have managed to move and fit smaller stones using ropes, rollers, and ramps. But scaling these methods up to hundreds of tons introduces exponential difficulty. Even with hundreds of volunteers moving such weights is slow, dangerous, and prone to failure. This has led some to speculate that ancient builders may have possessed techniques that are now lost to us, methods of reducing friction, lifting heavy loads, or even temporarily altering the properties of stone. Legends from around the world speak of softening stone or singing the stones into place. In the Andes, local traditions tell of high-pitched sounds or resonant vibrations that made the stones easier to move. In Egypt, some ancient accounts hint at the use of special liquids or rituals to prepare stone before shaping. While such stories are usually dismissed as myth, they may contain fragments of truth, symbolic descriptions of real, now forgotten techniques. If such methods once existed, then their disappearance is as significant as the stones themselves. It suggests that our ancestors may have reached technological or engineering heights that were later lost, perhaps due to societal collapse, natural disaster, or deliberate suppression. The result is a historical puzzle. We are left with the physical evidence of what they achieved, but none of the manuals that explain how. In the next and final segment of this chapter, we will examine one of the most compelling aspects of the megalithic mystery: The possibility that these structures are far older than we think, built not by the cultures to which we attribute them, but by an earlier, forgotten civilization whose fingerprints remain only in the stones they left behind. If the scale and precision of these megaliths is difficult to reconcile with the abilities of known ancient cultures, then their age may be even more unsettling. In many cases, the official narrative attributes these stoneworks to civilizations whose own architecture elsewhere is far less advanced. This raises a provocative possibility that the cultures we credit with building them may instead have inherited the ruins from an earlier, more capable civilization. Consider the site of Baalbek once more. Archaeologists attribute the grand temple complex to the Romans, who certainly built much of what we see today. But the massive trilithon stones beneath the temple bear no definitive proof of Roman workmanship. The Romans were master engineers, yet their records are silent about moving stones of such size. Roman construction elsewhere favors smaller, more manageable blocks. Could it be that when they arrived in Baalbek, the massive foundation was already there, a relic of an earlier age, and they simply built atop it? A similar debate surrounds the stone platforms of Pumapunku. The Tiwanaku culture, to which the site is credited, certainly flourished in the region, but the precision-cut andesite blocks stand apart from their other works. Some researchers suggest that the Tiwanaku may have repurposed an older site, incorporating the mysterious megaliths into their own structures. In this theory, Pumapunku is the remnant of an earlier civilization whose identity is now lost to time. In Egypt, the Valley Temple and the Sphinx Temple at Giza present a similar anomaly. The massive limestone blocks in their construction are unlike the smaller, more uniform stones used in later Egyptian buildings. Geological studies of the Sphinx enclosure suggest that some of the weathering patterns could be the result of prolonged exposure to heavy rainfall, conditions that would date parts of the site to a time long before the Sahara became a desert, potentially thousands of years earlier than the conventional timeline for Egyptian civilization. If these interpretations are correct, then we are looking not at isolated feats of ancient engineering, but at the scattered remnants of a lost epoch, an era in which humans, or human-like builders, possessed the means to work stone on a scale and with a precision that has since been forgotten. Such a civilization would have needed not only technical skill, but also social organization, resources, and a reason for undertaking such monumental projects. The purpose of these structures remains another mystery. Temples, fortresses, astronomical observatories, or something else entirely, something whose function we can no longer guess because we have no modern equivalent. Many of the sites align with celestial events, solstices, equinoxes, and the rising or setting of certain stars. This suggests an advanced understanding of astronomy, perhaps tied to agricultural cycles, religious rituals, or even navigation. But these alignments could also point to something more profound, a world view in which human life was intimately connected to the movements of the heavens. Some researchers have speculated that these megalithic sites formed part of a global network linked not just by style, but by purpose. The idea is that they were constructed according to a shared plan or inherited tradition, one that spanned continents and was passed down across generations, surviving in fragmentary form through myths, legends, and oral histories. If true, this would mean the builders of Baalbek, Sacsayhuaman, and Pumapunku were not isolated geniuses, but participants in a much larger story, one we have barely begun to uncover. Skeptics argue that these ideas overcomplicate the picture. They maintain that the builders were exactly who we think they were, that their achievements can be explained by human ingenuity, persistence, and the clever use of simple tools. But this explanation struggles to account for the common threads, the same astonishing precision, the same preference for impossibly large stones, the same mysterious alignments, appearing in cultures separated by oceans and thousands of years. Whether we see them as the products of known civilizations pushing the limits of their abilities or as the legacy of a forgotten people, the fact remains. These stones should not exist, and yet they do. They endure not just as monuments of stone, but as monuments to the mystery of human history. If the stones themselves seem impossible, then what they depict can be even more astonishing. Around the world, there are carvings and statues that show creatures no human should have ever seen, unless the timeline of life on Earth is not as we think. If stones can outlast empires, then the carvings and paintings left on them can preserve something far stranger, images of living things. And in some cases, these depictions do not match the known history of life on Earth. They show creatures no human should have ever seen unless the timeline we have been taught is incomplete. One of the most famous and controversial examples comes from Angkor Wat in Cambodia. Along a long, elaborately carved wall tucked among depictions of elephants, water buffalo, and familiar wildlife, there appears a creature with a row of distinctive curved plates along its back. It bears an uncanny resemblance to a stegosaurus. The carving is clear enough that even casual visitors notice it immediately. Its raised plates, its stance, even the curve of its tail. Mainstream archaeology insists this must be coincidence. Perhaps the artist intended a stylized rhinoceros or some mythical beast. Yet, the resemblance is strong enough that the question lingers. How could a culture that lived only centuries ago depict an animal believed to have been extinct for over 65 million years? Half a world away, in the jungles of South America, ancient petroglyphs tell their own strange stories. In the Amazon basin, researchers have documented rock carvings of animals resembling large, long-necked reptiles with tails and bodies that match no known species in the region. The carvings are not vague. They are detailed enough to suggest that the artists knew exactly what they were portraying. These creatures bear similarities to sauropod dinosaurs, the long-necked giants of the Mesozoic era. Even in North America, legends and images persist. Native American tribes, such as the Anasazi, the Choctaw, and the Iroquois, tell stories of massive reptilian creatures, sometimes winged, sometimes serpent-like, sometimes bearing features of dinosaurs. In Utah's Natural Bridges National Monument, a rock painting appears to show a long-necked animal with a small head and a long tail, again strikingly similar to a sauropod. Skeptics argue it could be an abstract depiction of a snake or other animal, but once again, the form is suggestive enough to provoke debate. Perhaps the most curious case lies in the Acámbaro figurines of Guanajuato, Mexico. Discovered in the 1940s by a German shopkeeper named Waldemar Julsrud, these thousands of clay figures depict an astonishing variety of creatures, including dinosaurs, marine reptiles, and even humanoids interacting with them. Many of the figurines show humans riding, hunting, or coexisting with these creatures. The sheer number, over 30,000 pieces, combined with their detailed anatomy, has led some to argue they could not be fakes made overnight. Yet mainstream archaeology rejects them as modern hoaxes, citing the lack of corroborating evidence and the implausibility of humans and dinosaurs coexisting. Still, the Acámbaro collection is not unique in showing such anomalies. In the ancient city of Ephesus in modern-day Turkey, Roman mosaics have been found depicting creatures with features reminiscent of prehistoric animals, long necks, clawed limbs, reptilian tails. In parts of Africa, tribal carvings and oral histories describe monstrous beasts that bear uncanny similarities to dinosaurs, despite the lack of fossil evidence in their immediate environments. There is also the intriguing case of the Ica stones of Peru. These carved andesite stones, many hundreds of which have been documented, depict not only dinosaurs but also scenes of advanced surgery, astronomy, and maps of the Earth as it may have looked in prehistoric times. While mainstream opinion dismisses the Ica stones as modern fabrications, pointing out that the collector who popularized them admitted to commissioning some carvings, the stones' origins remain murky. Local farmers insist that such stones had been found long before the controversy, sometimes buried deep within ancient tombs. If these depictions are genuine and ancient, they present an extraordinary challenge to the established history of life. Either the timeline is wrong and humans once shared the earth with creatures we believe long extinct, or ancient peoples somehow possessed remarkably accurate knowledge of creatures they could never have seen alive. The latter would suggest either an advanced scientific tradition capable of reconstructing accurate images from fossils, or the preservation of knowledge passed down from a much earlier time when such creatures still roamed. In the next segment, we will examine whether fossil evidence, combined with oral traditions, could explain these anomalies, or whether something stranger is at play. The possibility that humans might have once seen living dinosaurs seems at first glance impossible. Our current scientific framework holds that non-avian dinosaurs died out around 66 million years ago, long before humans, or even our earliest mammalian ancestors, were capable of recognizing them. Yet, if we look closely at the fossil record, myths, and the geological past, strange overlaps begin to emerge. One explanation often proposed by skeptics is that ancient artists and storytellers may have based their depictions on fossilized remains. In regions like Mongolia's Gobi Desert or the American West, fossil beds sometimes contain remarkably complete skeletons. A curious observer, coming across such a discovery centuries or millennia ago, could have reconstructed the creature's likely appearance. This theory has a certain logic, and it might explain why some depictions match prehistoric animals so closely, especially in areas rich in fossils. Indeed, paleontologists themselves acknowledge that fossil finds are not limited to modern times. The Greeks, for example, may have drawn inspiration for myths of giants and monsters from fossilized bones found in their territories. The Cyclops of Greek mythology may have been inspired by the skulls of prehistoric dwarf elephants, whose large central nasal cavity was mistaken for a single eye socket. Similarly, Chinese legends of dragons may have been sparked by discoveries of dinosaur bones in riverbeds and mountainsides. In China, such fossils were collected for centuries and referred to as dragon bones, ground into powder for traditional medicine. But this explanation has its limits. Fossilized bones do not preserve color, texture, or the exact posture of the living animal. For ancient depictions to match dinosaurs so closely, down to the correct placement of certain features, would require either a remarkable leap of imagination or access to knowledge we don't understand. The Stegosaurus-like carving at Angkor Wat, for instance, shows not only the iconic plates, but also their correct number and arrangement, something not easily inferred from an incomplete skeleton. Then there is the matter of oral tradition. In regions far from known fossil beds, indigenous peoples describe creatures that match prehistoric animals in unsettling detail. The African Congo Basin, for example, is home to stories of the Mokele Mbembe, a large, long-necked, swamp-dwelling creature said to resemble a sauropod. In the Australian outback, Aboriginal legends speak of the bunyip, a water creature with a face and body often compared to extinct megafauna or even marine reptiles. Such stories are remarkably consistent over generations, suggesting they are not random inventions but deeply rooted cultural memories. Could these legends preserve echoes of encounters with real animals? Creatures that somehow survived long past their supposed extinction dates? The idea may sound like fantasy, but the coelacanth, a deep-sea fish thought extinct for 66 million years, was rediscovered alive in 1938. Likewise, the giant monitor lizard Varanus priscus, also known as the megalania, once roamed Australia alongside early humans, disappearing only a few tens of thousands of years ago. If large reptiles could persist into human times, could others have done the same? Archaeological oddities deepen the mystery. In certain burial sites, bones of large, unknown reptiles have been found alongside human remains, as if the two coexisted or were part of shared rituals. While most of these finds are explained as misidentified crocodile or alligator remains, there are a few cases where the size, shape, or skeletal features do not match any known species. Such anomalies rarely make headlines, as they are often dismissed before thorough investigation. Mainstream science, understandably, resists any notion that undermines the established evolutionary timeline. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and isolated carvings or artifacts are not enough to rewrite prehistory. But the cumulative weight of these anomalies, the consistency of depictions across distant cultures, the presence of detailed features unlikely to be guessed, the survival of other extinct species into modern times, keeps the question alive. In our next segment, we will explore the possibility that these depictions are not isolated coincidences, but fragments of a larger, interconnected body of knowledge, one that suggests ancient humans may have inherited these images from a much older source. That source may have been a lost civilization, one that lived in an age when the boundaries between myth and reality were not as we draw them today. If the idea of humans and dinosaurs coexisting feels like pure fantasy, perhaps it is because we are used to thinking in terms of clean, unbroken timelines, neat sequences in which one era ends before another begins. But real history, even as recorded by science, is rarely that tidy. Extinctions are sometimes sudden, sometimes staggered. Remnants of once dominant creatures can survive in isolated pockets long after they have vanished elsewhere. This is why some researchers have suggested that what ancient cultures recorded in carvings, legends, and oral histories may be the final echoes of species that lingered far longer than we imagine. Consider the concept of the relict population, a small group of organisms surviving from a once widespread species. In modern times, we have documented many such survivors. The Wollemi pine, thought extinct for 2 million years, was found alive in a remote canyon in Australia in 1994. The Laotian rock rat, a mammal believed to have vanished 11 million years ago, turned up in a food market in 2005. These discoveries remind us that absence in the fossil record is not proof of total extinction. It is only proof that we have not yet found the evidence. Now apply this to deep time. The Earth is vast, with jungles, swamps, deserts, and ocean depths still largely unexplored. Could it be that, tens of thousands of years ago, some descendants of prehistoric reptiles lived in isolation, crossing paths with early humans? It is not beyond reason to imagine a small population of sauropod-like reptiles surviving in the wetlands of Africa or South America, much like the crocodiles and alligators that still thrive today. If such encounters occurred, they would certainly have made a profound impression on our ancestors, inspiring the myths, carvings, and traditions we still find. In this context, the striking similarities between dragon legends across different cultures become harder to dismiss as mere coincidence. European dragons, Chinese lung, Mesoamerican feathered serpents, and Aboriginal rainbow serpents all share certain features: reptilian bodies, great size, formidable power. The details differ. Some breathe fire, some fly, others dwell in rivers. But the core image is shared across continents that, according to mainstream history, had no contact for millennia. Could these be imaginative transformations of once real encounters with large reptiles that are now long gone? This leads to another question. If such creatures did survive into human times, why are they gone now? The most obvious answer is environmental change. As the Ice Age ended, climates shifted dramatically. Wetlands shrank, forests retreated, and human populations expanded into new territories. Larger, slower breeding animals, particularly those that posed threats or competed for resources, would have been hunted, driven out, or simply failed to adapt to the changing world. The same fate befell mammoths, giant ground sloths, and saber-toothed cats. If giant reptiles had survived into the Holocene, they would have faced the same pressures. Some researchers have proposed that remnants of this knowledge could have been deliberately preserved not only in oral tradition but in deliberate stone carvings and ceremonial art. In this theory, the unusual creatures in temples, petroglyphs, and artifacts were not random artistic flourishes but sacred records of animals that were already rare or vanishing. To the people who created these works, recording such a creature might have been akin to engraving the memory of a god. The archaeological problem is that the physical evidence, bones, skin, or DNA, has not yet been found in a context that confirms these creatures lived alongside humans. Without such proof, the topic remains in the realm of speculation. Yet, speculation is not baseless when so many independent cultural records from so many different corners of the earth converge on similar images. If this convergence is real, then the implications are twofold. Either there was a survival of prehistoric forms into recent times, or these depictions originated from a shared, much older body of knowledge. Perhaps one inherited from a civilization that existed before the currently recognized dawn of history. And if that is the case, then the creatures carved into temple walls and painted in caves might not be eyewitness accounts at all, but inherited memories, stories passed down from a deep past, echoing an age when humans were not yet alone as the dominant large animals on Earth. In the final segment of this chapter, we will explore the boldest possibility of all, that these creatures, whether through survival, memory, or myth, form part of a larger pattern, one that links them to global catastrophes, mass extinctions, and the mysterious end of a forgotten age. If we take the boldest view, the story these ancient images tell is not about isolated encounters or stray survivors. It is about the end of an age. In this interpretation, the creatures carved into temples and etched onto stone were part of a larger world that was violently and permanently transformed. The same events that erased these beings from existence may also have erased the civilization, or civilizations, that recorded them. This idea is not without precedent. Earth's history is marked by cataclysmic events that reshaped the biosphere almost overnight. 66 million years ago, an asteroid impact obliterated the non-avian dinosaurs in one of the most famous mass extinctions. But closer to our own time, around 12,800 years ago, something happened that left a distinct geological and archaeological signature: the Younger Dryas event. This period saw a sudden return to near-glacial conditions, massive floods, and widespread extinctions of large mammals. Many researchers now believe it was triggered by a cosmic impact or a series of them, striking ice sheets and causing catastrophic climate shifts. What is intriguing is that myths from around the world speak of an age of monsters or beasts that ended in fire, flood, or darkness. In some traditions, these creatures are described as dragons, serpents, or giant reptiles, sometimes framed as enemies of humankind, sometimes as powerful allies or guardians. The pattern is eerily consistent, a time when the world was wilder, filled with dangerous and awe-inspiring beings, followed by a calamity that swept them away. In this scenario, the creatures out of time are not random anomalies. They are remnants of collective memory, fragments of a story passed down across millennia. This would explain why such images appear in places separated by oceans and continents, why they retain similar shapes, and why they are often bound up with tales of destruction. It may also explain why these depictions are usually embedded in sacred or ceremonial contexts, because to the people who carved them, these beings represented something far greater than mere animals. They were symbols of a vanished world. Could an advanced civilization have witnessed this transition, preserving its knowledge in art, myth, and perhaps even hidden archives? Proponents of this idea suggest that such a culture might have existed before the great floods and climate shifts, passing fragments of its history to the survivors who rebuilt in the Holocene. If so, then the dragons, sauropods, and other impossible creatures of ancient art are more than curiosities. They are echoes from a prehistory that has been all but erased. Of course, this remains speculation. Without definitive fossil evidence, without remains that can be carbon dated to human times, the academic consensus will remain skeptical. And yet, the visual record persists. No single artifact is conclusive, but taken together, they form a puzzle whose pieces refuse to fit neatly into the accepted timeline. It is here, in the space between the known and the unknown, that curiosity thrives. Perhaps one day a definitive discovery will settle the matter. A skeleton preserved in a peat bog beside human tools, a cave painting dated beyond dispute, or genetic material recovered from an unexpected source. Until then, we are left with the carvings, the myths, and the haunting possibility that the Earth we think we know is only a shadow of the one that came before. But the story of ancient anomalies does not end with living creatures. Just as these depictions hint at a deeper, hidden history, there are other artifacts that seem to whisper of technologies far beyond their supposed age, objects that, like the creatures, do not belong where they are found. And among them, one discovery in particular has forced even the most skeptical scientists to take notice: a device recovered from a shipwreck that should not have existed for another 1,000 years. And so, as the last echoes of the creatures out of time fade, we turn our attention to a new mystery, one forged not in flesh and bone, but in bronze and gears. A machine that rewrites what we thought we knew about the ancient world. The Aegean Sea in the spring of 1900 was calm on the surface, but below, in the depths near the small Greek island of Antikythera, a storm of history waited to be discovered. A group of sponge divers from the island of Simi had taken shelter there from rough weather. As the seas calmed, they decided to dive, not for treasure, but for their livelihood: sponges. Yet one diver, Elias Stadiatis, surfaced from the depths, gasping for breath, his eyes wide not from the strain of the dive, but from what he had seen. On the seabed, more than 40 meters below, lay the scattered remains of a shipwreck: amphorae, statues, and fragments of what appeared to be an ancient cargo. The Greek authorities were alerted, and soon a salvage operation began. Over the following months, divers retrieved a trove of remarkable artifacts: bronze statues, marble sculptures, coins, jewelry, objects that spoke of a ship lost around the turn of the first millennium BCE. Among the recovered items was a lump of corroded bronze and wood, so unimpressive at first that it was set aside in the storerooms of the National Archaeological Museum in Athens. For years, the strange object went unnoticed, its significance hidden under layers of green corrosion. It was only in 1902, when archaeologist Valerio Stais examined it more closely, that something extraordinary emerged. Embedded within the mass were bronze gear wheels, finely toothed, crafted with a precision no one had ever attributed to the ancient world. The discovery caused a stir, but the implications were so far outside the accepted narrative of technological history that many dismissed the object as a curiosity rather than a revolution. Today, we know that this lump was the remains of the Antikythera mechanism, a device so advanced that it has been called the world's first analog computer. Built over 2,000 years ago, it could track the motions of the sun and moon, predict eclipses, and model the movements of the planets according to the astronomical knowledge of its time. Nothing approaching its complexity would be seen again for more than 1,000 years. The mere existence of such a device poses a problem for our understanding of ancient technology. Conventional history holds that the Greeks of the Hellenistic period had great skill in mathematics and astronomy, but their mechanical technology was limited to simple geared devices like water clocks or odometers. Yet, the Antikythera mechanism contains at least 30 interlocking bronze gears, some with teeth barely a millimeter apart, all designed to mesh perfectly in a way that requires both advanced metallurgy and extraordinary craftsmanship. This was not the work of a tinkerer. This was the product of a mature tradition of precision engineering, one that, according to our current historical record, simply should not have existed in that era. The obvious question follows: if this was not an isolated creation, what happened to the tradition that produced it? Why do we not find other devices like it scattered across the Mediterranean archaeological record? Some historians suggest that the mechanism was the creation of a single genius, perhaps inspired by the work of Archimedes, who was known for designing complex war machines and mechanical models of the heavens. Others propose that it was the work of a workshop or school, perhaps in Rhodes or Alexandria, where skilled artisans and mathematicians collaborated to produce scientific instruments for wealthy patrons. If so, the Antikythera mechanism might have been one of several such devices, most of which have long since been destroyed or lost to the sea. The implications are staggering. If Hellenistic engineers could produce something this sophisticated, what else might they have achieved that has left no trace? And why does the technological record appear to regress after their time, with nothing of comparable complexity reappearing until the geared astronomical clocks of medieval Europe? In the next segment, we will examine the mechanism's design in detail, how it worked, what it could do, and why it may represent not just an isolated marvel, but a surviving fragment of a forgotten chapter in human technological history. When modern researchers first began to study the Antikythera mechanism in earnest, they quickly realized that it was not simply a collection of random gears. It was an intricately planned system of precision components, each with a specific purpose. Though much of the original device had corroded or broken away, enough remained to reconstruct its essential structure: a box roughly the size of a large dictionary, about 33 centimeters tall, 18 centimeters wide, and 9 centimeters deep, with bronze plates and a set of dials on its front and back. Inside, a network of interlocking gears translated a single rotational input into a variety of complex outputs. The front dial displayed the solar calendar and the zodiac, allowing the user to track the position of the sun through the year. Small pointers could be moved to align with specific dates, while inscriptions indicated the rising and setting of prominent stars. This alone would have been an impressive astronomical tool for navigation, agriculture, and ritual observance. But the mechanism went far beyond that. The back dials were even more remarkable. One tracked the 19-year Metonic cycle, a period after which the phases of the moon repeat on the same calendar dates. Another displayed the 76-year Callipic cycle, a refinement of the Metonic cycle used by ancient Greek astronomers to improve accuracy. A third dial modeled the 223-month Saros cycle, allowing predictions of solar and lunar eclipses, a capability that would have been seen as nothing short of magical in antiquity. The mechanism even accounted for the elliptical orbit of the moon, using a pin and slot system to vary the speed of the lunar pointer in a way that matches reality. The level of mathematical and mechanical sophistication here cannot be overstated. Designing such a device required not only precise astronomical data, but also an understanding of how to translate that data into a physical machine. The teeth of the gears had to be cut with a degree of precision that would challenge even modern metalworkers without specialized equipment. Bronze was expensive, and each gear would have been painstakingly cast and finished by hand. This was not the work of an amateur craftsman experimenting in a workshop. It was the result of a highly organized tradition of instrument making. Recent imaging studies using X-ray tomography have revealed inscriptions on the surviving fragments, more than 2,000 characters of ancient Greek text, describing the functions of the dials and pointers. These inscriptions confirm that the device was intended as an astronomical computer, not merely a teaching tool or astrological curiosity. They also provide tantalizing hints about its origin. The style of lettering suggests a date between 150 and 100 BCE, placing it firmly in the Hellenistic period, a time when Greek science was flourishing in centers like Alexandria and Rhodes. One of the most intriguing aspects of the Antikythera mechanism is that it seems to represent the peak of a hidden technological curve. If it was indeed the product of a tradition of geared devices, then that tradition must have begun generations earlier, developing gradually toward this level of complexity. Yet, apart from a few textual references to devices by Archimedes and others, no other such machines survive. It is as though we have stumbled upon a single surviving supercar in a world otherwise filled with ox carts, and we are left to wonder what the roads once looked like. Skeptics sometimes argue that the Antikythera mechanism was a one-off marvel, a kind of mechanical masterpiece created for a wealthy patron or as a demonstration of skill. But this explanation does not quite fit. The level of refinement in the mechanism suggests iterative development, not a single leap of genius. Its creators would have needed to test, adjust, and perfect their designs over multiple projects. And if such projects existed, then somewhere, perhaps still buried, perhaps dissolved by time, there may once have been other devices equally sophisticated. For the ancient Greeks, the mechanism would have been more than a scientific instrument. It was also a symbolic object, embodying their belief that the cosmos was governed by rational, comprehensible laws that could be modeled and understood by the human mind. In the Hellenistic worldview, to predict the motions of the heavens was to participate in the divine order of the universe. Owning such a device would have been a statement of both intellectual power and cultural prestige. In the next segment, we will follow the trail of clues about where this device might have been made, who could have built it, and how such knowledge could vanish so completely that it would not reappear for over 1,000 years. The search for the origins of the Antikythera mechanism has taken researchers into the heart of the ancient Greek world, to places where science, philosophy, and craftsmanship converged. The two most likely centers of its creation are Rhodes and Alexandria, cosmopolitan hubs of the Hellenistic era, each with a tradition of astronomy, engineering, and advanced metalwork. Rhodes, in particular, was famed for its schools of navigation and astronomy. Situated at the crossroads of Aegean and Eastern trade routes, the island drew sailors, merchants, and scholars alike. It was home to Hipparchus, one of the greatest astronomers of antiquity, whose work on the lunar cycle matches the data encoded in the Antikythera mechanism's gears. Hipparchus is credited with developing a precise model of the moon's irregular motion, a model that the mechanism appears to replicate with astonishing accuracy. Alexandria, by contrast, was the intellectual capital of the Hellenistic world. Its library was the largest repository of knowledge in the ancient world, and its museum was a research institution where mathematicians, engineers, and inventors exchanged ideas. The city's scholars studied everything from the geometry of the heavens to the mechanics of siege engines. It is easy to imagine such a device being commissioned by a wealthy patron there, perhaps intended for teaching, navigation, or even for display as a symbol of human mastery over the cosmos. Yet, even if we can place its origins in one of these centers, another question remains. How could the knowledge to build such a device vanish so completely? The answer may lie in the fragility of complex societies. The Hellenistic kingdoms that fostered this level of science were eventually absorbed into the expanding Roman Republic, and later, the Empire. Rome valued Greek culture, but its priorities were practical: roads, aqueducts, and military engineering, rather than precision astronomical instruments. Over time, workshops capable of producing such devices may have closed, their secrets lost as the craftsmen died or their tools were repurposed. Wars, economic decline, and shifting cultural values could have erased the demand for such devices entirely. In the absence of continuous production, even a technology as sophisticated as the Antikythera mechanism could disappear, leaving only scattered fragments to be rediscovered centuries later. The Antikythera shipwreck itself offers more clues. Analysis of the recovered artifacts suggests the ship was a Roman vessel carrying Greek treasures, possibly loot or purchased goods, toward the Italian peninsula. The statues aboard date to the 4th century BCE, but the coins and amphorae suggest a sinking around 70 to 60 BCE. This means the mechanism was already decades old at the time of the wreck, possibly a cherished heirloom or scientific instrument being transported to a new owner. The surviving fragments also hint at its original appearance. Reconstructions suggest it was housed in a wooden case with bronze plates covered in inscriptions. The front featured a large dial with zodiac markings and a pointer for the sun, along with smaller subsidiary dials. The back had spiral-shaped dials for the eclipse cycle and other astronomical data. Turning a crank, possibly a bronze handle, would set the gears in motion, allowing the user to simulate the movements of the heavens. For the Greeks, such a device would have held immense cultural and intellectual significance. It was a physical embodiment of the idea that the cosmos could be understood, modeled, and even predicted. In a world where the line between science and philosophy was fluid, owning the mechanism would have been akin to holding a miniature universe in one's hands, a tangible proof of humanity's ability to grasp divine order. Today, the Antikythera mechanism stands as a reminder that history is not a straight line of progress. Technologies can be discovered, perfected, and then lost for centuries, only to be rediscovered when the world is ready to use them again. Its survival is a fluke. Most such devices would have been melted down for their bronze, their wooden cases rotted away, their knowledge fading into legend. That we have even a fragment is almost miraculous. In our final segment for this chapter, we will explore the modern investigation into the Antikythera mechanism, how 21st century technology has peeled back its secrets, and what those discoveries might tell us about the true scope of ancient innovation. By the late 20th century, the Antikythera mechanism had already intrigued a small group of scholars, but it was the arrival of advanced imaging technology in the early 2000s that transformed curiosity into revelation. Using high-resolution X-ray computed tomography, researchers could peer inside the corroded bronze fragments without damaging them. What they found astonished even the most cautious experts. Hidden beneath the incrustations were delicate gear teeth, arranged in patterns that matched no other known artifact from antiquity. Some gears had as many as 223 teeth, an exact match for the Saros eclipse cycle. Others formed trains that modeled the 19-year Metonic cycle, the 76-year Callipic cycle, and even the varying motion of the moon. The mechanism also had a dial for predicting the timing of ancient athletic games, including the Olympics, linking celestial events to the rhythms of human society. Perhaps most striking were the inscriptions painstakingly revealed by the scans. These tiny Greek letters, many less than 2 millimeters tall, described the purpose of each dial and pointer in a level of detail that confirmed the device's use as an astronomical computer. The texts even listed specific cities and star risings, tying the mechanism's operation to real-world observations. In other words, this was not an abstract model. It was a working, data-driven machine. Modern reconstructions have brought the Antikythera mechanism back to life. Using 3D printing, precision machining, and careful study of ancient gear-making techniques, researchers have built functioning replicas that demonstrate just how sophisticated the original was. Turning a single handle sends a cascade of gears into motion, each one driving another, until the positions of the sun, moon, and eclipses are displayed in perfect harmony with the cycles of the heavens. And yet, even with these insights, the mechanism remains an enigma. Who commissioned it? Was it a royal gift, a teaching tool for an academy, or a navigator's aid aboard a great merchant ship? Why have we found no others? The answers remain elusive, hidden somewhere between archaeology and the ocean floor. Some suggest that more devices may still be waiting to be discovered, perhaps in other shipwrecks lying silent in the dark waters of the Aegean or Mediterranean. Others believe that this was the pinnacle of a brief but brilliant era of mechanical astronomy, cut short by shifting empires and the loss of scientific continuity. Whatever the truth, the Antikythera mechanism forces us to reconsider the technological landscape of the ancient world. It reminds us that progress is not inevitable, and that history is filled with moments where knowledge soars to unexpected heights before plunging into shadow. This bronze relic, rescued from the sea, speaks across the centuries, whispering of forgotten workshops, vanished artisans, and a vision of the cosmos far ahead of its time. The Antikythera mechanism may have been the most advanced scientific instrument of its age, but it is not the only discovery to defy the technological timeline. Our next journey will take us from the depths of the sea to the remote highlands of South America, where a series of monumental lines etched into the desert floor tell a story not of metal gears, but of an ancient people who drew pictures so vast they could only be seen from the sky. The Nazca Desert in southern Peru is a place of extremes, barren, sun-scorched, and seemingly empty. But from above, its surface tells another story entirely. Across an arid plateau stretching for dozens of kilometers, enormous designs are etched into the earth. Straight lines running to the horizon, sweeping curves that shape the forms of animals, plants, and geometric patterns. These are the Nazca Lines, among the most extraordinary and enduring creations of the ancient world. From the ground, they are almost invisible, their shallow grooves blending into the reddish-brown stones scattered across the desert floor. But take to the air, and the patterns reveal themselves in startling clarity. A giant hummingbird stretches its delicate wings across nearly 300 feet. A monkey curls its tail into a perfect spiral. A spider with impossibly long legs appears to stride across the plain. There are hundreds of these figures, some geometric, some stylized depictions of living creatures, and many whose meaning remains uncertain. The Nazca civilization, which flourished between 200 BCE and 600 CE, is credited with creating these immense geoglyphs. Their society thrived in one of the driest regions on Earth, mastering irrigation techniques to farm in a place that receives less than an inch of rainfall each year. The people who lived here built an intricate culture centered on agriculture, water management, and religion. But nothing they left behind compares to the scale and ambition of the lines carved into their desert home. Even in modern times, the discovery of the Nazca Lines was accidental. In the 1920s, pilots flying commercial routes over Peru noticed strange patterns stretching across the desert floor. From that moment, scholars, adventurers, and storytellers alike became fascinated by the mystery. How had a pre-industrial society created figures that could only be fully appreciated from hundreds of feet in the air? And, perhaps more importantly, why had they done it at all? For decades, the prevailing theory linked the lines to astronomical purposes. Some researchers suggested that they formed a kind of giant observatory, aligning with the positions of the sun, moon, and stars at key times of the year. Others believed they might mark solstices or equinoxes, serving as a calendar for agricultural or ceremonial purposes. Still others saw them as processional paths, routes walked during religious rituals meant to honor deities or appeal for water in the arid landscape. Yet the Nazca Lines resist any single explanation. Some alignments do appear to match solar and lunar events, but many do not. The sheer variety of shapes and orientations suggests that they were created for multiple purposes over centuries. The animal figures in particular have invited symbolic interpretations. The hummingbird might represent resurrection or renewal, the monkey, fertility, the spider, rain. These meanings remain speculative, but they hint at a worldview in which nature, survival, and the divine were closely intertwined. The scale of the work is staggering. Some straight lines run for more than 10 kilometers without deviating. Geometrical shapes, trapezoids, triangles, and rectangles stretch over vast distances with near-perfect symmetry. To achieve such precision without modern surveying tools speaks to an advanced understanding of geometry and planning. It is here that the true genius of the Nazca people emerges, not in technology as we think of it today, but in their ability to organize large-scale projects with minimal resources and maximum vision. Creating the Nazca Lines began with a simple yet ingenious technique. The surface of the desert is covered with a layer of dark iron oxide-coated stones. Beneath this thin crust lies a lighter, sandy soil. By carefully removing the darker stones along precise outlines, the Nazca people revealed the pale ground beneath, producing a stark contrast visible even from far above. The arid climate of the region, with its almost total absence of wind and rain, has preserved these designs for centuries, making them among the most enduring works of art on the planet. Despite their size and complexity, no large labor force was needed all at once. Archaeologists believe small groups could complete a single figure or a section of a line in a matter of days or weeks, using nothing more than wooden stakes and ropes to ensure straight edges and accurate proportions. These humble tools, combined with skill and careful planning, were enough to execute projects that today would require aerial mapping or computer-assisted design. The Nazca Lines are spread across an area of nearly 500 square kilometers, and their density varies across the landscape. In some zones, the lines overlap, suggesting that newer designs were laid atop older ones, perhaps as the meanings or priorities of the culture shifted. This overlapping raises another puzzle. The Nazca people must have been able to maintain a coherent sense of proportion and orientation even when earlier lines cut across their work. Such precision points to a deep cultural knowledge of spatial measurement. As for the imagery itself, the variety is striking. Birds dominate the animal figures: condors, herons, hummingbirds, each stylized yet instantly recognizable. Land creatures like the monkey, dog, and spider add to the menagerie, while abstract designs, spirals, zigzags, and arrows speak to an artistic vocabulary beyond mere representation. Some figures are so large that they require walking for minutes just to cross their wings or tails, an experience that might itself have been part of their ritual function. In recent years, new figures have come to light thanks to drones and satellite imaging. Some of these newly discovered geoglyphs are smaller and cruder, possibly representing earlier or experimental phases of the tradition. Others depict unfamiliar animals such as whales and cats, challenging assumptions about what the Nazca people saw and valued in their world. These revelations suggest that the story of the Nazca Lines is still unfolding, with each technological advance adding layers to a narrative carved into the earth itself. The line's survival is due in large part to the stability of the Nazca Desert. With virtually no rainfall, minimal wind, and a steady climate, the shallow trenches have remained undisturbed for centuries. Yet this same fragility means that any modern disturbance, vehicles, construction, even careless footsteps, can cause damage that lasts for generations. Preservation efforts focus not only on preventing such harm, but also on educating the public about the line's cultural and historical significance. The question of why the Nazca Lines were created continues to stir debate. One prominent theory focuses on water, the most precious resource in the desert. Some researchers believe the lines and figures were part of rituals intended to call upon the gods for rain or to celebrate the arrival of seasonal water flows. Certain lines appear to lead toward ancient aqueducts or underground channels, hinting at a symbolic link between the drawings and the sources of life they depended upon. Another interpretation leans toward the astronomical. Scholars such as Maria Reiche, the German mathematician who devoted her life to studying the lines, argued that many of the straight paths align with the rising or setting points of celestial bodies. Reiche believed the lines could have functioned as a massive open-air observatory, helping the Nazca track seasonal changes crucial to agriculture. While later studies challenged the precision of these alignments, the theory still holds sway for many who see in the Nazca Lines a deep connection between earth and sky. Still others take a broader symbolic view, seeing the lines as a fusion of art, spirituality, and social cohesion. The sheer effort required to design and construct them would have united communities in a common purpose, reinforcing cultural identity. In a harsh and unpredictable environment, such acts of collective expression may have been as vital to survival as the canals and fields that sustained them. The desert itself became a canvas, a testament to the Nazca people's mastery over their world and their willingness to leave a mark for generations yet unborn. In modern times, the Nazca Lines have captured the public imagination far beyond Peru. Their scale and mystery have drawn comparisons to other ancient wonders, from the pyramids of Egypt to Stonehenge in England. They have also fueled more speculative theories. Claims of extraterrestrial involvement, for instance, often point to the fact that the designs can only be fully appreciated from the air. While mainstream archaeologists dismiss such ideas, they illustrate the enduring allure of the lines as a puzzle without a definitive answer. The site today is protected under Peruvian law, and UNESCO's recognition has brought global attention to the need for preservation. Yet threats remain. Illegal mining, unregulated tourism, and infrastructure projects have all posed risks to the fragile designs. Even a single misstep by a vehicle can leave scars visible for decades, disrupting patterns that have survived since antiquity. Protecting the Nazca Lines is a constant balancing act, ensuring access for study and admiration while safeguarding them from harm in a modern world that moves far faster than the ancient one that created them. In the 21st century, technology has become the newest ally in decoding the Nazca Lines. High-resolution satellite imagery, LiDAR scanning, and drones have revealed hundreds of additional geoglyphs, many smaller and more weathered than the famous figures. These discoveries suggest that the tradition of line making may have been even more widespread and enduring than previously thought, spanning generations and evolving over time. The desert floor is slowly giving up its secrets, but it remains a vast, silent archive of human intent. Yet for all that science has uncovered, the essential mystery endures. We can measure the lines, map their orientations, and reconstruct the tools used to create them. We can theorize about their religious or astronomical functions or their role in uniting the community. But the thoughts and beliefs of the people who walked these dusty paths 2,000 years ago remain beyond our reach. The Nazca Lines are as much a mirror as they are a message. They reflect our curiosity, our urge to connect with the past, and our fascination with what cannot be fully known. Standing on a rise at the edge of the plateau, the desert stretches outward in every direction, unbroken except for those faint, deliberate marks. The wind is minimal, the silence immense. It is here, under the same sun that blazed over the Nazca people, that one begins to understand. These lines were not meant for the eyes alone, but for the spirit. They are an act of permanence in a place where nothing should last. And as we leave the desert behind, our journey into the mysteries of the ancient world continues. For the Nazca Lines are but one chapter in a much larger story, a story written in stone, earth, and memory, waiting for us in the next place where the past still whispers through the sands of time. Far out in the South Pacific, more than 2,000 kilometers from the nearest inhabited land, there rises a triangle of dark, volcanic rock, small enough to cross on foot in a day, yet large enough to hold one of the great enigmas of human history. The world knows it as Easter Island. Its people call it Rapa Nui. Here, along wind-scoured cliffs and grassy slopes, stand hundreds of stone giants with long noses and heavy brows, their backs to the sea and their eyes, once inlaid with coral and obsidian, turned inward toward the heart of the island. These are the Moai, and they watch over a story as quiet and inscrutable as their faces. To arrive at Rapa Nui, even today, is to feel distance made tangible. The sea seems to erase memory, replacing it with the tremor of propellers or the creak of a ship's hull and the steady insistence of horizon. Then, suddenly, the island appears. A low outline of three extinct volcanoes, Teravaca, Poike, and Ranocao, and a scatter of smaller cones, their slopes painted in greens and browns by a climate that knows both drought and rain. There are no forests to conceal what is here. The landscape is open, the sky is enormous, and everywhere the silhouettes of the Moai rise from ahu platforms like sentinels stationed along the edge of time. At first glance, the statues seem similar: elongated heads, pursed lips, austere calm. Look longer, and you begin to see individuals, subtle differences in jawline and ear, in the swell of the nose and the slope of the shoulders. Some wear pukao, cylindrical top-knots of red scoria carved from a different quarry, their rusty color a deliberate contrast against the gray of the statues beneath. Many Moai lie fallen, face down in the grass or broken where they stood. Others remain half-buried along the slopes of Rano Raraku, the quarry where most were carved, as if the workers simply walked away one day, leaving their charges to doze in the tuff. The quarry is the island's silent workshop. In the soft volcanic tuff of Rano Raraku's flanks, you can trace the marks of tools, the outline of half-freed giants still joined to the mountain by a stone umbilical. There are statues in every stage of becoming, forms emerging from the rock, like thoughts taking shape. A brow carved, a nose suggested, an ear beginning to curl away from the matrix. It is here that the scale of the endeavor becomes apparent. The largest standing Moai measures over 10 meters and weighs tens of tons. Even those of ordinary size would have defied small teams without a plan, a system, and a reason strong enough to bind a community to such labor for generations. The reason, the islanders say, was mana, power, efficacy, a spiritual force connected to ancestors and chiefs. The Moai were not gods in themselves, they were embodiments, conduits. They stood upon ahu, stone platforms that served as tombs and ceremonial stages, facing inland to watch over the living, to hold the lineage steady like a keel holds a canoe. To erect a statue was to anchor a clan to its land, to speak the name of its ancestors in stone so that the wind could not unmake it. And yet, if the purpose is understood in outline, the means remain contested. How were these immense figures carved, transported, and raised? The island offers hints, but resists certainty. Stone picks fashioned from harder basalt litter the quarry. You can see how they bit into the tuff, flaking away layers until a face emerged. The carving happened horizontally, with the statue lying on its back, still attached by a spine of uncut rock. Only when the front and sides were complete would workers sever that final tether, sliding the Moai down the slope into a shallow pit to sculpt the back and refine the neck. Then came the problem of movement. The Moai stand along the coast on nearly every side of Rapa Nui, some kilometers from the quarry, their roots to the sea traced by legends and by the occasional broken statue abandoned beside an ancient road. Older theories imagined sledges and rollers, the statues laid prone and dragged across the island, consuming vast quantities of wood and manpower. But Rapa Nui's treeless plains raise a puzzle. If forests once covered the island, where did they go? And when? One answer tells of overuse, of a people who felled their palms to move their monuments, stripping the land until only grass remained. Another points to rats, stowaways that devoured seeds and seedlings, preventing the forest's return. In this reading, collapse is not a single act, but a sequence of pressures, ecology, climate, politics, unfolding over centuries. In recent decades, islanders and researchers have proposed a different vision of transport, one that feels both humbler and more astonishing. The Moai, they say, walked. With ropes tied high around the statue's head, teams on either side could rocket forward, shifting weight from edge to edge as you would move a refrigerator through a narrow doorway. Foot by foot, the statue would sway and step. This method fits the Moai's center of gravity, their forward-leaning posture, even the wear patterns along the old roads. It also aligns with oral histories. The Moai, given mana through ceremony, were made to walk. In a landscape of limited resources, such a technique makes elegant sense. No forests required, only coordination, chant, and time. The final act was to raise the Moai and give it sight. On the Ahu, builders prepared a ramp and pivoted the statue upright, perhaps with a scaffold of stones and earthen fill that they removed after the Moai stood. Into the carved sockets of the face they placed white coral eyes with dark obsidian pupils. Accounts from the 19th century insist that only then did the statue truly live, its mana complete. Without the eyes, a Moai was a body without breath. With them, it watched and acted, a presence at the edge of sea and sky. European contact came like a sharp interruption to this long continuity. On Easter Sunday of 1722, the Dutch navigator Jacob Roggeveen sighted the island and lent it the name the outside world would use. Others followed, Spaniards, Britons, whalers, bringing trade and disease, curiosity, and violence. By the 19th century, slave raids from Peru and epidemics had ravaged the population, and the Moai, once watchmen, were toppled in conflicts and upheaval. Only in the 20th century did restoration efforts begin, raising some statues back onto their ahu, clearing fallen stones and piecing together a heritage nearly erased by the churn of oceans and empires. Walk the coastal road at dawn and the island speaks in layers. Surf explodes against black lava shelves. Horses graze where gardens once lay. The wind comes steady off the sea, threading through dry grasses, tugging at the edges of silence. Ahead, a line of Moai stands on a reconstructed platform, their silhouettes cutting the brightening sky. You notice the craftsmanship, the subtle polish of cheeks, the way the clavicles meet the sternum in a shallow V, the delicate hollow beneath the lower lip. Up close, their scale is intimate, not giants of fantasy, but human high magnified many times, the proportions of a face you might love or fear translated into stone. Nothing here is quite as simple as the pictures in our heads. Rapa Nui is not only a cautionary tale of collapse, nor solely a hymn to ancestral devotion, it is both and more. It is ingenuity without metal, architecture without mortar, logistics without beasts of burden. It is a people who engineered meaning into matter, who took volcanic ash and turned it into lineage. The mystery is not whether the Moai were possible, clearly they were, but what kind of society chooses to invest so much in memory made visible in ancestors writ as horizon. The cultural landscape of Rapa Nui is not defined only by the Moai. Beneath the open sky, the island holds other traces of ingenuity. Stone gardens designed to coax crops from poor volcanic soil, chicken houses shaped like miniature igloos to protect precious fowl, and stone walls that break the wind so sweet potatoes can grow. These are the remains of a people who adapted to scarcity with precision and creativity. Archaeologists map these features with the same care they give the statues, for in their own way, they too are monuments, testaments to survival on an isolated speck of land. The Ahu platforms themselves are masterworks of engineering. Large foundation stones are fitted without mortar, their faces so well aligned that centuries of wind and salt have not shifted them. Some platforms stretch over 100 feet, composed of multiple tiers and filled with rubble for stability. In front of the Ahu lies a cleared plaza where ceremonies would have taken place, the Moai looming above as silent witnesses. Each platform belonged to a clan, its Moai representing the lineage and authority of its leaders. To stand before one is to stand in the space where politics, spirituality, and artistry merged into a single act. Rapa Nui's isolation magnifies every choice. With no large mammals and little in the way of resources, the islanders relied on stone, earth, and their own coordinated effort to accomplish feats that in larger societies would require armies of workers and specialized tools. Oral traditions speak of the power of chant and ritual to unite the community, of the mana transferred from chiefs to the statues through sacred rites. In this worldview, the labor of carving and moving the Moai was not a burden, but a sacred duty, a collective affirmation of identity. Yet even the most enduring traditions are vulnerable. By the late 17th or early 18th century, the Moai building era came to an end. The reasons are debated: environmental strain, clan rivalries, shifting belief systems, but whatever the cause, the change was profound. The Birdman cult rose to prominence, centered on the sacred site of Orongo atop the cliffs of Ranokau. Here, each year, competitors descended the sheer face of the cliff, swam through shark-infested waters to the islet of Motu Nui, and retrieved the first egg of the sooty tern. Victory granted the winning clan prestige and authority for the year. In this new order, the Moai faded from their central role, and some were deliberately toppled, their mana perhaps revoked as rival clans gained dominance. The 19th century brought a different kind of disruption, one from beyond the horizon. Peruvian slave raids in the 1860s tore hundreds from the island, many never to return. Those who did brought smallpox and tuberculosis, devastating the remaining population. By the late 1800s, only a handful of Rapa Nui survived, and their cultural knowledge was at risk of vanishing entirely. Missionaries, traders, and colonial administrations reshaped life on the island, confining inhabitants to small settlements and leasing much of the land to foreign ranching companies. The Moai, once guardians of clans, became weathered relics in fields grazed by sheep. It would be well into the 20th century before efforts began to restore the statues to their platforms and reclaim the island's heritage. Figures like Thor Heyerdahl, controversial though his theories were, brought international attention to Rapa Nui's archaeology. In the decades that followed, collaborative projects between local communities and researchers lifted fallen Moai, reconstructed Ahu, and revived ceremonies. The statues, once inert in the eyes of the outside world, resumed their role as symbols, not just of Rapa Nui's past, but of its living culture. In the quiet hours before dawn, when the ocean is still a dark mirror and the trade winds are barely stirring the grasses, Rapa Nui feels suspended between worlds. It is in these moments that the Moai seem most alive, not merely as stone figures, but as vessels of all the human intent, skill, and devotion poured into them over centuries. The volcanic rock holds the chill of the night, the carved faces softened in shadow, as if the ancestors themselves are watching the horizon for the first blush of light. The artistry of the Moai is more than physical form. Each statue is a message carved in the language of stone, a declaration of continuity, status, and identity. In societies without written records, such monuments function as archives. The elongated faces, stylized yet recognizable, compress generations of memory into a single image. The proportions, though exaggerated in the head and slender in the torso, reflect the Polynesian aesthetic, where the head was considered the seat of mana. Every angle and contour carried symbolic weight, as deliberate as the placement of the statue itself. Yet the landscape of Rapa Nui holds more than stone sentinels. The petroglyphs etched into the rocks at Orongo, Anakaitangata, and other sacred sites form another layer of storytelling. Spirals, birds, fish, and the distinctive birdman figure repeat across surfaces, hinting at ceremonial life and the shifting cosmology of the islanders. Some petroglyphs depict canoes with high prows, perhaps memorializing epic voyages or mythic journeys. Others seem to record genealogies, battles, or astronomical events. In these carvings, the island's art escapes the vertical form of the moai and flows outward, sprawling across the living rock like a text to be read by those who know its code. The moai themselves were not immutable. They aged, cracked, and weathered under the relentless wind and salt spray. Oral tradition suggests they were periodically restored or replaced, the mana refreshed through ceremony. This cycle of renewal suggests a dynamic relationship between people and monument, in contrast to the modern idea of a statue as a fixed, untouchable relic. To the Rapa Nui, the moai were part of a living system, a dialogue between past and present. When the outside world began to take interest in the island, that dialogue shifted. Scholars, collectors, and explorers sometimes removed artifacts, and even entire statues, taking them to museums across the globe. The Moai of the British Museum, for instance, stands thousands of miles from its ahu, its gaze meeting only the museum's walls instead of the open Pacific. For the Rapa Nui, the absence of these ancestral figures is more than cultural loss. It is the severing of a relationship. In recent decades, calls for repatriation have grown stronger, framing the return of these statues as an act of restoration, not only of heritage, but of spiritual balance. Meanwhile, on the island itself, the restored moai are once again part of daily life. They stand behind schools and community centers, at the edges of soccer fields and along coastal trails. Tourists walk among them, cameras in hand, their presence bringing both opportunity and tension. Tourism sustains much of the modern economy, but it also risks reducing the moai to backdrops for photographs, detaching them from the context of ritual and history. Local guides and cultural organizations work to counter this, telling the stories, explaining the symbolism, and reminding visitors that these statues are not anonymous art. They are people, ancestors, and protectors. Even today, debates over the island's past remain charged. Was deforestation truly the result of overexploitation, or have colonial narratives exaggerated the idea of self-inflicted collapse to serve their own purposes? Archaeological evidence increasingly points to a more nuanced picture, an adaptive, resilient society whose challenges were compounded by contact and exploitation from beyond. In this telling, the moai become not symbols of hubris, but of extraordinary resourcefulness, a people transforming a remote and limited environment into a place of monumental achievement. In the modern era, the moai stand not only as archaeological marvels, but as living symbols of cultural resilience. Their silhouettes against the Pacific sky have become an emblem recognized worldwide, yet for the Rapa Nui, they remain deeply personal. The names of the ancestors they represent are still remembered in oral traditions. Songs, dances, and ceremonies link the present generation to those whose images tower over the island's slopes. For a culture that endured near extinction, the act of remembering is itself a form of defiance, a way to keep the mana flowing across centuries. The island's governance today is a blend of Chilean administration and strong local autonomy. In recent decades, Rapa Nui leaders have reclaimed stewardship of their heritage sites, placing decisions about tourism, restoration, and preservation back in local hands. This shift is more than political. It represents a return of authority to the people whose ancestors carved the moai. It is a living reminder that heritage management is not just about stones, but about the community that gives them meaning. Visitors arriving now are greeted with clear guidelines. The moai are not to be touched, climbed, or treated as props. Such rules are not about restriction, but respect, acknowledging that these are not ruins in the conventional sense, but sacred presences. In many ways, the island has found a balance between sharing its wonders with the world and protecting the integrity of its traditions. The moai's gaze, once meant for clan members alone, now falls on all who come to learn, listen, and walk among them with reverence. In the stillness of sunset, when the ocean swallows the sun in a blaze of gold and violet, the Moai take on an almost ethereal quality. Their faces, hewn centuries ago, merge with the play of shadow and fading light. It is in these moments that one senses the continuum of human experience. The same horizon seen by the first voyagers, the same wind carrying the same salt, the same desire to endure. As we step away from Rapa Nui, the journey carries us onward to yet another place where the past clings to the present like a whispered secret. Beyond the Pacific, across lands and centuries, another enigma awaits. A place where ancient hands shaped the earth itself into symbols so vast they could be seen only from the heavens. There, the next chapter of our exploration begins. In the arid heart of northern Chile lies the Atacama Desert, a place so dry, so stripped of moisture, that entire centuries pass without a single drop of rain. Under its cloudless skies, the air is thin, the sun merciless, and the land itself feels stripped to its bones. Yet in this harsh emptiness, the earth bears marks that defy the centuries, hundreds of vast designs carved into the ground, etched into the slopes of barren hills. These geoglyphs, some barely visible up close but striking when seen from afar, tell of a time when this desolate expanse was a bustling artery of human movement. The most famous of these is the Atacama Giant, a colossal anthropomorphic figure stretching nearly 390 feet across the side of Cerro Unitas. Its body is stylized and geometric, yet unmistakably human, with arms outstretched and an elongated head crowned by radiating lines. To the untrained eye, it may seem simply decorative, but researchers believe it once served a practical and ceremonial function. Some interpret the figure as a deity, perhaps linked to fertility or cosmic order. Others suggest it was a giant astronomical calendar, its lines and shapes aligned to signal solstices and seasonal changes essential for survival in such an unforgiving environment. The desert around it is scattered with other, smaller figures, llamas in long processions, spirals, abstract shapes, and symbols whose meaning has been lost to time. Many of these geoglyphs line the ancient caravan routes used by traders during the pre-Columbian era, when the desert was not a barrier, but a highway connecting the coastal communities of the Pacific with the Andean highlands. Caravans of llama and human porters carried goods, salt, dried fish, coca leaves, copper, across these windswept plains. The geoglyphs may have served as landmarks, ceremonial stops, or spiritual guardians along the way. What is most remarkable is how these designs have endured. Created by scraping away the dark surface stones to reveal lighter soil beneath, the figures stand out in contrast to the surrounding terrain. Without rain to erode them or vegetation to cover them, they have remained visible for centuries. The dry air and stable conditions of the Atacama are as close to a natural time capsule as the Earth can provide, preserving these messages from a world long vanished. The Atacama's vastness plays tricks on perception. Standing at the base of the giant, you see only sloping rock and faint lines, but from a nearby ridge, or better yet from the air, the figure snaps into focus, every proportion and curve deliberate. It is a reminder that these works were designed for a vantage point humans could not naturally achieve. Whether they were meant for the eyes of gods, spirits, or the ancestors watching from the mountains, their creators clearly thought on a scale that reached beyond the immediate and the human. Theories about their purpose abound. Some archaeologists view them as the work of the Tiwanaku or Inca cultures, expanding their influence into the desert and marking their roots with sacred art. Others argue for a local culture adapted to this environment and deeply embedded in its rhythms, blending art, astronomy, and navigation into a single tradition. Still others, looking at the scale and precision, wonder if the designs had a role in ceremonial pilgrimages, each geoglyph a stage in a ritual journey through the landscape. As one moves deeper into the Atacama, the geoglyphs begin to feel less like isolated works of art and more like fragments of a vast, interconnected code. Certain figures appear in clusters, their arrangement suggesting sequences or pathways. Lines of llamas march toward stylized suns, spirals unwind into animal shapes, and geometric patterns repeat across miles of terrain. Some scholars see these repetitions as intentional, markers for travelers retracing sacred routes season after season, generation after generation. The Atacama Giant itself dominates its hillside in a way no other figure does. Its towering proportions, the symmetry of its limbs, and the mysterious patterns within its body speak of deliberate design. Some archaeologists have proposed that the radiating lines around its head represent a headdress or crown, linking it to depictions of deities in the Andes. Others have noted that certain lines in its torso align with the rising of specific stars and the setting of the sun during key points of the agricultural year. In this reading, the giant was not just an emblem of power or faith, it was a tool, an immense calendar etched into the earth. Yet the more one studies these figures, the more questions arise. Why were some geoglyphs placed high on hillsides visible from far away, while others rest on flat ground, where their forms could only be appreciated from above? Were these intended for human eyes at all, or for supernatural ones? Could they have been offerings, messages sent skyward to the gods or ancestors who were believed to dwell in the heavens? Evidence suggests the makers of these geoglyphs were skilled engineers of the land. By removing the darker surface stones to reveal the lighter soil beneath, they created images with stark contrast that could endure centuries without significant fading. In some cases, they added rocks to build raised designs, giving the figures a texture and depth that still catches light and shadow in the desert sun. These were not casual marks. They required planning, manpower, and an intimate knowledge of the terrain. The desert's role as a crossroads cannot be overstated. Long before asphalt highways, these caravan routes connected cultures separated by mountains and ocean. The geoglyphs may have signaled more than directions. They could have conveyed identity, clan affiliation, or spiritual protection. A llama caravan traveling toward the coast might stop beneath a hillside figure, making offerings of food or coca leaves before continuing their journey. In this way, the landscape became both a map and a temple. While modern eyes often focus on the grandeur of the Atacama Giant, locals see these works as part of a larger cultural fabric. Many contemporary communities in northern Chile trace their heritage back to the desert's ancient inhabitants, maintaining traditions that echo the rituals of the past. Annual festivals, dances, and offerings still honor the spirits of the land, blending Catholic and pre-Columbian beliefs into a living continuum. From a distance, the Atacama landscape appears silent, but in truth, it hums with the echoes of countless journeys. For thousands of years, humans have crossed these vast plains, their footsteps and caravan tracks woven into the desert's fabric. The geoglyphs were more than static images. They were part of a living system of movement, memory, and meaning. When traders, herders, and pilgrims walked here, they didn't just pass through the land, they interacted with it, adding stones, refreshing outlines, and keeping the designs alive through generations. Archaeologists examining the Atacama Giant and its companions often uncover signs of ritual activity nearby. Small offerings, stone cairns, fragments of ceramic vessels, shells carried from the distant coast, hint at ceremonies performed in the shadow of these great figures. Such offerings may have been acts of devotion, payments for safe passage, or tributes to the spirits believed to guard these routes. In some places, traces of fire pits suggest that processions might have paused here for nighttime rituals, the flames dancing in the wind as chants rose into the star-filled sky. The sky itself played a central role in this cultural landscape. In a place so free of clouds, the heavens are overwhelming, so vast and clear that the Milky Way seems to rest directly upon the earth. For ancient desert dwellers, the stars were not distant lights. They were living beings, guiding and governing the human world. The lines of the Atacama Giant may have mirrored the positions of key constellations, allowing its creators to track the passing of seasons and the timing of festivals. In this way, the geoglyph was not just a work of art, it was an instrument of cosmic order. Yet mysteries remain. Despite decades of research, no single explanation can encompass the variety and complexity of the Atacama's geoglyphs. Some appear deeply symbolic, while others look practical, like directional markers. The sheer scale of the giant, however, suggests a purpose beyond the everyday. Its towering presence commands attention in a way that speaks of power, reverence, and perhaps even fear. Modern technology has brought new insights. Drone photography, satellite imagery, and 3D mapping have revealed faint geoglyphs that had been lost to human sight, their outlines blurred by centuries of wind. Some of these hidden designs link with known figures, suggesting that the Atacama's ancient artists were working on a scale even greater than we imagined. The desert, it seems, still holds many of its secrets in plain sight, visible only to those who know how to look. Today, the Atacama Giant stands as both a mystery and a heritage emblem. Tourists come from across the globe to walk the desert's dry expanse, stand beneath the giant's outstretched arms, and imagine the world in which it was created. Archaeologists and local communities alike work to preserve it, not only as a valuable archaeological site, but as a sacred place rooted in ancestral traditions. Fences and viewing platforms protect the most fragile designs, and strict regulations prevent visitors from walking directly across the geoglyphs. For the descendants of those who once traversed these routes, the figures are more than ancient art. They are messages from the past, still speaking across centuries. Oral histories speak of the desert as a living entity, a place of testing and transformation. The giant is sometimes referred to as a guardian, its watchful form protecting travelers and marking a spiritual boundary between worlds. This sense of guardianship endures in local rituals where offerings of flowers, food, or even small carved stones are left at nearby shrines. From an aerial view, the Atacama's geoglyphs seem almost like a script, a language without an alphabet, telling stories through form and scale. They remind us that communication can transcend words, that symbols etched into the earth can speak across cultures and millennia. In their scale, they force us to confront how ancient peoples thought, not in terms of days or years, but in lifetimes and generations. The starkness of the desert makes the survival of these works even more remarkable. In many places, the only sound is the whisper of the wind carrying grains of sand across the slopes. The sun bakes the hillsides, and the night sky reveals constellations in pristine clarity. Here, time feels slower, almost suspended, as if the figures could wait another 1,000 years without fading. And yet, the story of the Atacama Giant is just one piece of the puzzle. Across the globe, other cultures have etched their own symbols into the land, sometimes as messages to travelers, sometimes as invitations to the divine. From the dry expanse of Chile, our journey now shifts to another landscape, where stone and soil have been shaped into mysterious forms for reasons still debated. Beneath a different sky, another enigma awaits, ready to tell its story to those who know how to listen. In the barren plains of southern Peru between the Andes and the Pacific Ocean lies a canvas unlike any other in the world. Stretching for miles across the arid desert floor are the Nazca Lines, hundreds of enormous geoglyphs etched into the earth, their shapes ranging from precise geometric patterns to sprawling depictions of animals, plants, and abstract forms. From ground level, these lines appear as shallow trenches carved into the reddish soil, revealing the lighter sand beneath. But from the air, they transform into breathtaking works of art. Giant birds in flight, a spider poised mid-step, a monkey with an impossibly coiled tail. The Nazca Desert is one of the driest places on Earth, with minimal rainfall, almost no wind, and a climate so stable that the lines drawn between 500 BCE and 500 CE have remained virtually unchanged for over 1,500 years. Created by the Nazca culture, a civilization skilled in irrigation, pottery, and textile weaving, these geoglyphs are among the most enduring and puzzling legacies of the ancient world. Their scale is staggering. Some figures stretch over 1,200 feet, long enough to be recognized only from high above, an observation that fuels one of the greatest debates in archaeology. The method of their creation was deceptively simple. Workers removed the thin layer of dark, oxidized pebbles that covered the desert floor, exposing the pale ground beneath. The lack of rain and the hardness of the soil prevented erosion, allowing the lines to survive for centuries. Yet simplicity in method does not explain their precision. Many designs are perfectly proportioned despite being impossible to fully view from the ground. Without airplanes, drones, or even elevated platforms, how did the Nazca achieve such accuracy? Various theories have been proposed. Some researchers believe the lines were massive ceremonial pathways designed to be walked during rituals dedicated to deities, especially those connected to water and fertility, vital resources in the harsh desert. Others suggest they formed part of an astronomical calendar mapping of the movements of the sun, moon, and stars across the year. Certain lines seem to align with the sunrise or sunset at solstices, lending weight to the idea that they functioned as giant observatories. Then there are the more speculative ideas. The sheer scale of the figures, visible in their entirety only from above, has led to suggestions, often popularized outside of academic circles, that they were meant for the eyes of gods watching from the sky. Some go further still, proposing that the lines were created as signals or messages to extraterrestrial visitors. While such theories remain outside mainstream scholarship, they speak to the deep sense of wonder these geoglyphs inspire. Walking among the lines, the silence of the desert is almost overwhelming. The air feels thin and dry, the horizon flat and endless, and the pale streaks of the geoglyphs seem to pull your gaze outward, beyond the limits of human scale. To the Nazca people, these designs were not just marks on the earth. They were sacred landscapes, physical manifestations of their beliefs, hopes, and fears. The sheer diversity of the Nazca Lines is as remarkable as their size. More than 300 distinct figures have been documented, falling into three broad categories: straight lines, geometric shapes, and biomorphic forms representing living creatures. The straight lines can extend for miles, cutting across valleys and plains with uncanny precision. Trapezoids and rectangles are scattered across the desert, their edges crisp and symmetrical, despite the uneven terrain. But it is the biomorphic figures that capture the imagination most. Stylized animals like hummingbirds, condors, lizards, and whales, each rendered with flowing, confident lines that suggest both artistic mastery and symbolic depth. Some figures seem connected to the Nazca's environment and survival. The hummingbird, for example, is associated in Andean tradition with rain and fertility, a potent symbol in such an arid region. The whale might reference the bounty of the Pacific, which lay only a few dozen miles from the desert, yet remained invisible from inland settlements. The spider, with its association to water in many indigenous myths, may have been invoked to ensure agricultural success. Each figure was not merely decorative, it carried meaning woven into the fabric of Nazca spiritual life. The layout of the geoglyphs reveals an astonishing level of planning. Archaeologists believe that wooden stakes were used to mark out designs before the topsoil was removed, allowing artists to scale up smaller drawings to monumental size. Excavations have unearthed some of these ancient stakes still standing in their original positions, mute witnesses to the construction process. The precision suggests a centralized vision, perhaps directed by a class of priest engineers who combined practical geometry with religious purpose. The desert itself likely played a role in how the lines were experienced. On the ground, many of the shapes are invisible in their entirety, but walking along them could have been a ritual act. Processions might follow a path that gradually revealed the figure's form through partial glimpses, an experience as much about movement and participation as about seeing. This interplay of art, ritual, and environment makes the Nazca Lines not just images, but living ceremonial spaces etched into the earth. The question of why they are so large and so visible from above has inspired countless interpretations. Some archaeologists emphasize the idea of sky gods, deities who were thought to dwell in the heavens and oversee human affairs. The lines visible from great heights, could have been offerings meant to be read by these divine beings. Others point out that the surrounding hills provide elevated viewpoints from which parts of the designs could be seen, suggesting that not all imagery required flight to appreciate. Modern research using aerial surveys has revealed new geoglyphs missed in earlier studies, often obscured by erosion or simply overlooked due to their faint outlines. Some of these newly found figures are older and smaller, hinting at a developmental history in which the Nazca people experimented with different forms before committing to the monumental works we see today. This evolving artistry suggests that the lines were not a single project, but a cultural tradition spanning centuries. Among the most striking qualities of the Nazca Lines is their endurance, how these delicate works have survived for over a millennium in an environment that seems inhospitable to all but the hardiest forms of life. The desert's stability is the key. With almost no rain, no flowing rivers, and minimal wind, the exposed pale soil remains intact. Even footprints from recent visitors can last for years unless disturbed. This preservation has turned the Nazca Plain into a time capsule, holding patterns made by hands long vanished. Yet endurance also has its vulnerabilities. In recent years, the growth of tourism and development has placed new pressures on the site. Roads, vehicles, and even careless footsteps can irreversibly damage a figure that has survived countless centuries. Archaeologists and local authorities have worked to balance public access with protection, setting strict paths for visitors and using aerial platforms to allow safe viewing. The challenge is ensuring that these images remain for future generations without stripping them of their living connection to the people who still see them as sacred. The cultural meaning of the lines is still a subject of deep study. In some Andean traditions, the landscape is alive, a sacred body with veins, eyes, and breath. The Nazca Lines in this interpretation are not isolated artworks, but part of a greater whole, each connected to water sources, mountains, and celestial events. The trapezoids might point toward distant mountain peaks where clouds gather. The animal figures could act as intermediaries between humans and the forces that govern the natural world. Seen this way, the desert is not empty, but alive with purpose, the lines acting as threads in a vast spiritual web. Excavations near some geoglyphs have uncovered fragments of pottery, textiles, and wooden ceremonial objects. These findings hint that rituals were conducted directly on or beside the lines, perhaps offerings to ensure rain, fertility, or protection. In certain areas, signs of controlled burning suggest that fire played a role, illuminating the shapes against the darkness during nighttime ceremonies. The thought of hundreds of people gathered under the crystalline desert sky, the flicker of flames tracing figures that could be seen only from above, is as haunting as it is beautiful. Modern technology continues to reveal new aspects of the Nazca Lines. High-resolution satellite imagery has identified dozens of smaller, older geoglyphs hidden beneath layers of dust. These earlier works seem cruder in design, suggesting a learning process that evolved into the monumental mastery of later periods. By studying these older figures, archaeologists hope to reconstruct the cultural shifts that shaped the Nazca people's relationship with their environment and their gods. From the ground, it can be difficult to comprehend the true scale of what the Nazca achieved. Only when viewed from the air or imagined in the mind's eye do the lines reveal themselves as deliberate, unified creations. The desert becomes a gallery with no walls, no ceiling, and an audience that might just have been the sky itself. In the end, the Nazca Lines remain a paradox, simultaneously an open book and an unsolved riddle. Anyone can see them. Their forms are laid bare against the desert's ochre floor. And yet, the meaning behind them slips through our grasp like sand between the fingers. Were they maps to water, drawn for those who walk the desert's spine? Were they prayers etched so large that the gods could not ignore them? Or were they something stranger still? Messages intended for eyes that did not belong to this earth. Standing on one of the low surrounding hills, the desert stretches away in all directions, quiet and eternal. The light is harsh during the day, but in the late afternoon, when the sun sinks toward the horizon, the lines seem to deepen in contrast, almost glowing against the fading heat. In that moment, it's easy to imagine the Nazca people looking up at the same sun, the same sky, believing that their art was part of a cosmic conversation, one that connected the land, the heavens, and all life in between. The modern world has given us drones, satellites, and high-resolution photography, but even with these tools, we have not truly decoded the Nazca's intent. Perhaps that is part of the design. Some messages are not meant to be solved, only witnessed. The beauty of the Nazca Lines lies not only in their physical form, but in their ability to remind us that human creativity, faith, and ambition have always stretched beyond the visible horizon. In the vast sweep of human history, the desert geoglyphs, from the Atacama Giant to the sprawling Nazca figures, are more than archaeological curiosities. They are proof that people have always looked upward and outward, seeking connection with forces larger than themselves. These designs etched into the earth are not static relics. They are living echoes, whispers carried on the wind, reminders that the past is not gone. It's written into the very ground beneath our feet. And so our journey comes full circle, from stones carved with impossible histories to giants standing in the desert sun, from whispers of forgotten empires to messages that may have been meant for the stars. We have traveled across continents and centuries. The mysteries remain, waiting for another generation to look, to wonder, and perhaps to listen more closely. For in the end, history's greatest secrets are not just in what we can prove, but in what we dare to imagine.